Blood dripped onto frozen ground as Colt Mercer pressed his hand against the bullet wound tearing through his side. Behind him, 3 riders closed the distance, their rifles glinting in the dying light of 1878 Wyoming. Ahead, smoke rose from a lone cabin, his only chance at survival. He didn't know the woman who lived there would refuse to let him die, or that together they'd face a night of violence that would bind their fates forever. Stay with me until the end of this story, and comment what city you're watching from so I can see how far this tale has traveled. The bullet had found Colt Mercer 3 miles back, just as the sun began its descent behind the Absaroka Range. He remembered the crack of the rifle, the way his horse had screamed and lurched sideways, the hot punch of lead tearing through flesh just below his ribs. He remembered grabbing the saddle horn with both hands, his vision swimming, the taste of copper flooding his mouth. What came after existed in fragments, the thunder of hoofbeats behind him, voices shouting across the wind, the desperate kick of his heels against his mare's flanks as she ran for both their lives. Now, as the last colors bled from the Wyoming sky, Colt knew he was dying. His shirt was soaked through, the fabric sticking to his skin in a way that made every breath an agony. The cold November air bit at his face, but inside he burned with fever that had already begun its work. His fingers, slick with his own blood, could barely hold the reins. Beneath him, his horse, a bay mare named Duchess he'd owned for 6 years, stumbled more frequently now, her sides heaving, foam flecking her mouth. She'd given him everything she had. It wasn't going to be enough. The Blackwell gang had been tracking him for 2 days, ever since he'd witnessed them gunning down Bill Hendricks outside Laramie. Bill had been Colt's friend, his partner in a cattle venture that was supposed to set them both up for life. Instead, Bill had died in the dirt with 3 bullets in his back, killed for refusing to sell his land to Travis Blackwell's sprawling criminal empire. Colt had been in the saloon across the street, had seen the whole thing through the window. He'd made the mistake of running outside, of kneeling beside Bill's body, of looking up to see Travis Blackwell staring back at him with eyes like chips of ice. "We got a witness," Blackwell had said calmly, and Colt had run. He'd been running ever since. The terrain had turned rough an hour ago, pine forest giving way to rocky outcroppings and steep ravines that dropped away into darkness. Duchess picked her way carefully, but even in his fading consciousness, Colt could feel her failing, could sense the moment approaching when she would simply stop. He didn't blame her. He wanted to stop too, wanted to slide from the saddle and let the cold earth take him. At least it would be quiet. At least the pain would end. Then he smelled smoke. Wood smoke, sharp and clean, cutting through the scent of pine and his own blood. His head jerked up, eyes struggling to focus in the gathering dark. There, perhaps a quarter-mile ahead, nestled in a small valley between 2 ridges, a thin column of gray rose against the purple sky. A cabin. Someone lived out here in this godless wilderness, miles from the nearest town. Hope, painful and bright, flared in his chest. "Come on, girl," he whispered to Duchess, his voice barely more than a rasp. "Just a little further, just a little more." The mare seemed to understand. She found some reserve of strength Colt hadn't known she possessed and pushed forward, her hooves crunching through frost-brittle grass. The cabin grew larger, taking shape in the twilight, a small structure, solidly built, with a stone chimney from which that blessed smoke rose. There was a barn nearby, a split-rail fence, a chicken coop, signs of life, signs of hope. Colt never saw the woman until Duchess stumbled into the yard and his vision cleared for just a moment. She stood on the porch, a rifle already in her hands, pointed directly at his chest. Even through his failing sight, he could make out her silhouette, tall and slim, dark hair pulled back, wearing men's work clothes and boots. Her face was shadowed, but her stance was steady. She'd heard him coming and prepared herself. Smart. "Hold there," she called out, her voice carrying clearly across the distance. It was a good voice, Colt thought distantly. Strong, not panicked. "State your business." He tried to answer, tried to explain, but his tongue felt thick in his mouth. Instead, he simply swayed in the saddle, his hand finally losing its grip on the reins. The world tilted sideways. He had a confused impression of the sky wheeling above him, of Duchess's terrified whinny, of the ground rushing up to meet him. "Oh, Christ!" He heard her voice, much closer now, and then hands were on him, strong hands, surprisingly strong for a woman, catching him before he hit the frozen earth. He blinked up at her face, seeing it clearly for the first time. She was younger than he'd expected, perhaps 30, with gray eyes that were wide with alarm but not fear. There were lines at the corners of those eyes, etched by wind and sun and hardship. Her face was handsome rather than pretty, with high cheekbones and a firm jaw. A face that had seen trouble and survived it. "Didn't mean to trouble you," he managed, the words costing him everything he had left. "Hush," she said, and her hands moved quickly, efficiently, pressing against his side where the blood pulsed out in rhythm with his failing heart. "Don't talk, save your strength." "They're coming," he whispered urgently, his fingers grasping weakly at her sleeve. This was important. She needed to know. 3 of them. Maybe more. Following me. "You need to—" "I said hush." Her tone brooked no argument. She looked around quickly, assessing, then made a decision. "Can you stand if I help you?" "I can try." "That'll have to do." She got her shoulder under his arm and lifted, and Colt bit back a scream as fire exploded through his side. His vision went white, then black, then returned in nauseating waves. Somehow, his feet found the ground. Somehow they began moving toward the cabin, one agonizing step at a time. Behind them, Duchess stood with her head hanging nearly to the ground, her sides heaving like bellows. "Your horse," Colt gasped. "We'll wait," the woman said shortly. "You won't. Move." The steps up to the porch seemed insurmountable, a mountain range in miniature. Colt's legs buckled on the second one, but the woman held him up with a strength that belied her slim frame. She'd done hard work in her life, he realized. Her hands were calloused, her arms corded with lean muscle. This was no soft town woman playing at frontier life. This was someone who'd survived out here, alone, through who knew how many winters. The cabin's interior was warm and dim, lit by a fire in the stone hearth, and a single oil lamp on a rough wooden table. Colt had an impression of simple furnishings, everything neat and in its place, before the woman steered him toward a bed against the far wall and lowered him onto it. The mattress felt like heaven, soft and clean, and he couldn't stop the groan that escaped his lips. "Easy," she murmured, already moving away. "Let me see the damage." She returned with the lamp, setting it on a small table beside the bed, and began working at his shirt. Her fingers were quick and sure, unbuttoning, pulling the blood-soaked fabric away from his skin. When she saw the wound, her sharp intake of breath told him everything he needed to know. "That bad?" he asked, trying for a smile. "You're not dead yet," she replied, which wasn't exactly the reassurance he'd been hoping for. She leaned closer, examining the wound in the lamplight. "Bullet's still in there. Went in below the ribs, probably missed anything vital or you'd already be gone. But it needs to come out, and soon." "You done this before?" "Once." Her eyes met his, and he saw something dark and painful flicker there. "My father. Hunting accident 3 years back." "Did he make it?" She didn't answer, which was answer enough. Colt closed his eyes, feeling the last of his strength draining away like water through cupped hands. "Ma'am, I'm sorry for bringing this to your door. Those men following me, they're not the kind to give up. They'll come here. Then let them come." Her voice had gone hard as the iron poker beside the hearth. "This is my home. I've defended it before. I'll defend it again." "You don't understand. These are the Blackwell boys, Travis Blackwell's gang. They killed my friend in Laramie 2 days back, and I saw it happen. They won't stop until you're dead," she finished calmly. She was moving around the cabin now, gathering supplies. Cloth for bandages, a bottle of what looked like whiskey, a wicked-looking knife that she held briefly in the lamp flame. "I understand just fine, but you're not going to die. Not in my house. Not on my watch." "Why?" The question came out barely audible. "Why help me? You don't know me. Don't owe me anything." She paused in her preparations, looking at him with those steady gray eyes. For a long moment she didn't speak, and Colt wondered if she would answer at all. Then she said quietly, "Because no one should have to die alone and afraid. Because I know what it's like to watch someone bleed out while you feel helpless. And because—" She stopped, seeming to reconsider, then shook her head. "Doesn't matter why. What matters is keeping you alive long enough to testify against those bastards. Now drink this." She held out the whiskey bottle, and Colt took it with a shaking hand, managing 3 long pulls before she took it back. The liquor burned like hellfire going down, but it was good burn, familiar burn. Dutch courage, his father would have called it. He was going to need all the courage he could get. "What's your name?" he asked as she began cleaning the wound with a cloth soaked in whiskey. The pain was extraordinary, but he'd been hurt before. He knew how to breathe through it. "Clara Weston." She didn't look up from her work. "Yours?" "Colt Mercer. Out of West Texas originally. Was heading to Wyoming to start fresh when I saw something I shouldn't have." "West Texas," Clara repeated. "Long way from home." "Ain't got a home anymore. Ranch failed 2 years back. Drought took the cattle, bank took the land." He gritted his teeth as she probed deeper, her fingers gentle but thorough. "Bill Hendricks and I, we pooled what we had left and we're going to try again up here. Better land, better water. Or it would have been, if Travis Blackwell hadn't put 3 bullets in Bill's back for refusing to sell his claim." "I've heard of Blackwell," Clara said, her voice tight. "Bad man. Runs half the rustling operations from here to Montana. They say he's killed a dozen men, maybe more. And you saw him murder your friend?" "Clear as I'm seeing you now. He looked right at me after, knew I could hang him with my testimony. That's why they're coming. That's why they won't stop." Clara worked in silence for another minute, cleaning away blood, examining the wound from every angle. Finally, she sat back, reaching for the knife she'd heated in the lamp flame. "The bullet's deep, but I can reach it. This is going to hurt worse than anything you've ever felt. I'll be as quick as I can, but I need you to stay still. Can you do that?" Colt looked at her, really looked at her, and saw the fear she was trying to hide beneath that calm exterior. Her hands, so steady before, trembled slightly as she held the knife. She was terrified, he realized. Terrified she'd kill him, terrified of what was coming behind him, terrified of being alone out here when the Blackwell gang arrived. But she was going to do it anyway. She was going to cut into him and try to save his life because it was the right thing to do. Consequences be damned. "I can stay still," he said softly. "And Clara? Thank you." She nodded once, curtly, then took a piece of leather strap from the table and handed it to him. "Bite down on this. Try not to scream if you can help it. Sound carries in these hills, and we don't know how close they are." He put the strap between his teeth and nodded. Clara positioned the lamp for the best light, took a deep breath, and pressed the knife into his flesh. The pain was incredible, a white-hot agony that filled his entire world. Colt's back arched off the bed, every muscle in his body going rigid as Clara's knife cut deeper, following the bullet's path through torn muscle and damaged tissue. He bit down on the leather strap so hard he tasted blood, his own blood mixing with the taste already in his mouth. Darkness crowded the edges of his vision, and he fought against it with everything he had. If he passed out, he might not wake up. If he didn't wake up, Clara would be here alone when the Blackwell gang arrived. "I've got it," Clara breathed, and he felt something shift inside him, felt the pressure of her fingers against something that didn't belong. "Almost there. Just a little more. Stay with me, Colt." Her voice became his anchor in the storm of pain. He focused on it, on the calm determination in her words, on the way she said his name like he mattered, like his survival was important. How long had it been since someone had cared whether he lived or died? Since Bill had fallen in Laramie, he'd been alone, running and bleeding and knowing that if he fell, no one would come looking, no one would mourn him. The loneliness had been worse than the bullet in some ways. But Clara cared. A stranger who owed him nothing, who had every reason to turn him away and save herself the trouble, was fighting to keep him alive. "Got it." The bullet came free with a wet sound, and Clara held it up to the lamplight, a misshapen piece of lead, dark with his blood. She dropped it into a tin cup with a clink, then immediately returned her attention to the wound, packing it with clean cloth, binding it tight with strips of torn sheet. Her movements were quick and efficient now, the worst of the work done. And Colt felt the pain receding to a dull, throbbing ache. "You did good," Clara said quietly, wiping the blood from his skin with a clean, damp cloth. "Didn't pass out, didn't scream. You're tougher than you look, Colt Mercer." "Felt like screaming," he admitted, spitting out the leather strap. His voice was hoarse, wrecked. "Feel like screaming now." "But you didn't." That matters. She pulled a blanket up over him, tucking it around his shoulders with a gentleness that contrasted sharply with the steel he'd seen in her earlier. Now you need to rest. Your body's been through hell, and it needs time to heal. I'll keep watch. The gang, I'll keep watch, she repeated firmly. She picked up the rifle that had been leaning against the wall and checked its load. I've got 4 rounds in here, another box of ammunition in the cabinet. There are 3 good approaches to this cabin, and I know all of them. I can hold them off long enough for you to recover some strength. Then we'll figure out our next move together. You're one hell of a woman, Clara Weston. A ghost of a smile touched her lips. I've been called worse. Now sleep. Doctor's orders. You're not a doctor. Tonight I am. Sleep, Colt. He wanted to argue, wanted to stay awake and help her keep watch, but his body had other ideas. The whiskey, the blood loss, the shock of the surgery, all of it combined to drag him down into darkness despite his best efforts. The last thing he saw before sleep claimed him was Clara silhouetted against the firelight, rifle in hand, standing guard like some avenging angel. The last thing he heard was her voice, soft and low. You're safe now. Sleep. Colt dreamed of Texas, of the ranch that used to be his, of long summer days driving cattle across open plains. He dreamed of his mother, dead these 10 years, hanging laundry in the yard while she sang hymns in her clear, sweet voice. He dreamed of Bill Hendricks laughing over a poker hand, buying rounds for the house because they'd just sold 100 head at premium price. Good dreams, memories of a life that felt like it belonged to someone else now. Then the dreams turned dark. He was in Laramie again, watching through the saloon window as Bill stepped out into the street. Travis Blackwell was there with 2 of his men, their hands resting on their pistols. Bill's face was pale but determined as he shook his head, refusing whatever they'd demanded. The crack of gunfire, Bill falling, blood spreading across his shirt in 3 dark flowers. And Blackwell turning, his eyes finding Colt through the window, a slow smile spreading across his face. Found you, Blackwell said in the dream, and suddenly he was in the cabin, standing over Colt's bed with his pistol drawn. Did you really think you could run from me, boy? Did you really think some woman could keep you safe? Colt tried to move, tried to reach for a weapon, but his body wouldn't respond. He was paralyzed, helpless, watching as Blackwell's finger tightened on the trigger. He jerked awake with a gasp, his hand instinctively going to his side where the wound pulsed with dull fire. For a disoriented moment, he didn't know where he was, couldn't place the rough log walls, the dying fire, the unfamiliar weight of clean blankets. Then it came back. The chase. The bullet. Clara. Clara, who had saved his life. The cabin was dark except for the glow of embers in the hearth. Through the single window, Colt could see that night had fully fallen, stars bright and cold in a clear sky. His mouth was dry as old leather, and his head felt stuffed with cotton. Fever, probably. The wound was infected or would be soon. He needed water. Clara? His voice came out as a croak. Movement by the window, and then she was there, a shadow resolving into solid form. I'm here. How do you feel? Like I got shot and then had surgery without any real medical care, he said, attempting a smile. So not great, but better than dead. She brought him water in a tin cup, supporting his head while he drank. It was the best thing he'd ever tasted. When the cup was empty, she lowered him back to the pillow and felt his forehead with the back of her hand. You're running a fever, she said, concern threading through her voice. Not bad yet, but it will get worse before it gets better. I've seen it before. The next few days are going to be hard. Days? He tried to process that. Clara, they could be here by morning. I need to keep you alive, she interrupted. Which means keeping you still, keeping the wound clean, and making sure the fever doesn't cook your brain. Everything else is secondary. Not your safety. That's not secondary. She was quiet for a moment, and he could feel her studying him in the darkness. Finally, she said, Why do you care? You don't know me any better than I know you. You saved my life. So you feel obligated. So I don't want you hurt because of me. He shifted, trying to sit up, and immediately regretted it as pain lanced through his side. Clara's hands were there instantly, easing him back down with surprising gentleness. Those men, the Blackwell gang, they're not just going to ride up and politely ask if they can search the place. They're going to burn it if they have to, kill anyone who gets in their way, You need to understand what's coming. I understand perfectly. Her voice had gone cold again, that steel he'd heard before. I understand that evil men think they can take whatever they want, hurt whoever they want, and the rest of us are just supposed to lie down and let it happen. Well, I'm done lying down. I'm done running. I'm done being afraid. There was a story there, Colt realized. Something in her past that had hardened her, that had taught her to fight rather than flee. He wanted to ask, but this wasn't the time. Instead, he said, "Then we make a plan, together. Because if they come, when they come, we need to be ready." Agreed. Clara moved away and he heard the scrape of wood on wood as she dragged a chair closer to the bed. She sat down, the rifle across her lap, her face ghostly in the dim light. "Tell me everything. How many men? What kind of weapons? What are they likely to do?" So Colt told her. He described Travis Blackwell, a big man, over 6 feet, with a scar running from his left eye to his jaw, and a reputation for cruelty that kept most of Wyoming Territory terrified. He described Blackwell's lieutenants. Hawkins, a rail-thin man with dead eyes who was said to be the fastest draw north of Texas. Pike, a hulking brute who preferred a knife to a gun and was rumored to have killed a man with his bare hands in Denver. And Garrett, the youngest of the group but possibly the most dangerous, smart enough to plan jobs that left no witnesses. There might be more, Colt warned. Blackwell usually travels with at least 5 or 6 men. The 3 I mentioned are the ones I know about, the ones I saw in Laramie. But he could have others watching the roads, scouting ahead. So we could be facing 5 or 6 armed men, Clara said slowly. And there are 2 of us, one of whom can barely stand. That's about the size of it. I'm sorry, Clara. I should never have come here. Should have kept riding, led them away from— You were dying, she cut him off sharply. If you'd kept riding, you'd be dead in a ditch somewhere, and those men would still be out there terrorizing people. At least this way we have a chance. At least this way we fight. We, he repeated softly. You keep saying we, like you've already decided to stand with me. Did you think I'd throw you out once you could walk? Let you face them alone? It would be the smart thing to do, the safe thing. I haven't done the smart, safe thing in a long time. She stood, moving to the window, looking out at the night. My father built this cabin with his own hands. He cleared this land, planted those fields, raised those walls, log by log. When he died, everyone said I should sell, move back east where a woman alone could be properly protected. But this is my home, my father's home, and I'll be damned if I let some gang of murderers drive me out or burn it down. Colt heard the emotion underlying her words, grief, anger, and something that might have been loneliness. He understood it better than she knew. How long have you been alone out here? 3 years. Father died in the winter of 75. Pneumonia took him in the end, not the wound, though that probably weakened him enough for the sickness to take hold. She touched the window frame, her fingers tracing patterns in the dark. I thought about leaving after. Thought about it every day that first year. But where would I go? What would I do? Everything I know, everything I am, is tied to this land. So I stayed. I learned to hunt, to trap, to defend myself. I learned to be alone. That's a hard kind of learning. Yes, she agreed quietly. It is. They sat in silence for a while, Clara at the window and Colt in the bed, both of them thinking about the morning and what it might bring. The fire crackled softly, and somewhere outside an owl called, its voice lonely in the darkness. Colt found himself studying Clara's profile, the strong line of her jaw, the way she held herself with such careful control. She was beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with conventional prettiness and everything to do with strength of character. She'd been tested by this hard land and had emerged unbroken. That was a rare thing. Tell me about your plan, he said finally. You mentioned being ready when they come. What did you have in mind? Clara turned from the window, and in the faint light from the embers he could see the ghost of a smile on her face. Well, first we need to move you somewhere safer than this bed. If they come in shooting, you're exposed here. There's a root cellar under the kitchen, access through a trapdoor. It's small but secure, and it has another exit that leads to the barn. If things go bad, you can get out that way. And you? I'll be up here, making them think twice about coming inside. She patted the rifle. I'm a fair shot, Mr. Mercer. Not as good as my father was, but good enough. I can hold this cabin for a while, at least until... Until what? She hesitated, then said, There's a town called Fork Creek about 15 miles east of here. Small place, but they have a sheriff and a telegraph. If we could get word to them about the Blackwell gang being in the area, they might send help. 15 miles is a long way when you're being hunted, which is why we need a diversion. Something to make them think you're not here or that you're already dead. Colt thought about that, his fevered mind working slowly through possibilities. We could fake my death, he said finally. Leave evidence that I died from the gunshot wound, bury something in a shallow grave behind the cabin. If they find it, they might think their job is done and move on. It's risky, Clara said. If they decide to dig up the grave to make sure, then we'll have bought ourselves some time anyway. And if they don't buy it, we're no worse off than we are now. He tried to sit up again, more carefully this time, ignoring the way the room spun around him. Clara, I need you to know something. If it comes down to it, if they're going to take the cabin and there's no other way, you run. You use that escape tunnel and you run for Fork Creek and you don't look back. I'm not leaving you here to... I'm already dead if they catch me. You know that. I'm the witness. I'm the one they came for. But you're innocent in all this. You're just someone who tried to help a stranger. There's no reason for you to die too. There's every reason, Clara said fiercely, moving back to his bedside. You think I want to spend the rest of my life knowing I ran? Knowing I abandoned someone who needed help because I was too afraid to stand and fight? I'm not that person, Colt. I won't be that person. He looked up at her, seeing the determination blazing in her gray eyes, and felt something shift in his chest. This woman, this stranger who owed him nothing, was willing to risk everything to keep him alive. It was humbling and terrifying in equal measure. Then we stand together, he said softly. Whatever comes, we face it together. Together, Clara agreed and held out her hand. Colt took it, feeling the calluses on her palm, the strength in her grip. They shook on it, a covenant made in blood and firelight, and somehow Colt knew that whatever happened in the next few days would change both their lives forever. Whether that change would be measured in survival or tragedy remained to be seen, but they would face it together. The rest of the night passed slowly, measured out in the movement of stars across the sky and the gradual dying of the fire. Clara dozed in her chair by the window, the rifle never far from her hands, while Colt drifted in and out of fevered sleep. His dreams were dark and confused, full of gunshots and screaming horses and Bill Hendricks's face as the life drained out of his eyes. Once he woke gasping, certain he'd heard hoofbeats outside, but Clara assured him it was just the wind in the pines. Rest, she told him, her hand cool against his burning forehead. You need your strength. Can't rest, he mumbled, fighting against the pull of unconsciousness. Need to stay alert. Need to watch for... I'm watching, Clara interrupted gently. I've got this. You're safe, Colt. Sleep now. Those words, you're safe, sleep now, became a refrain through the long night. Every time Colt woke confused or afraid, Clara was there with the same quiet assurance. You're safe. Sleep now. It was the first time in longer than he could remember that someone had stood guard over him, had protected him while he was vulnerable. The trust it required was almost harder than the pain, but gradually, minute by minute and hour by hour, Colt began to believe her. His breathing eased, his racing heart slowed, and when he finally surrendered to true deep sleep, it was with Clara's voice echoing in his mind like a promise. You're safe. Sleep now. Dawn broke cold and clear, painting the Wyoming wilderness in shades of pink and gold. Clara stood at the window, watching the light creep across the valley, and tried not to think about what the day might bring. She'd spent the night preparing herself mentally, running through scenarios, planning for every possible outcome. But the truth was that no amount of preparation could fully ready her for what was coming. The Blackwell gang had a reputation for brutality that extended across 3 territories. If they came, and she had to assume they would, things would get bloody. Behind her, Colt stirred, and she turned to check on him. His fever had broken sometime before dawn, leaving him pale and weak but more lucid than he'd been. That was good. They would need clear heads for what came next. "Morning," she said, bringing him water and some of the venison stew she'd warmed over the fire. "How do you feel?" "Like hell," Colt admitted, accepting the food gratefully. "But better than last night. The fever's down?" "For now, it'll probably come back. Wound infections usually cycle like that for the first few days." Clara sat on the edge of the bed, studying him with a clinical eye. "You're stronger than you look, I'll give you that. Most men would still be unconscious after what you went through. Mercer men are stubborn. It's a family trait." He managed a few bites of stew, then set the bowl aside. "What's our situation?" "Quiet so far. No sign of anyone on the road, no movement in the trees. But that doesn't mean they're not out there. Could be they're waiting for full light. Could be they're watching right now, trying to figure out the best approach. Could be they rode right past in the dark and are miles away by now," Colt suggested, but his tone said he didn't believe it any more than she did. "We need to assume they're coming," Clara said, "which means we need to move you to the cellar and set up our defenses. Can you walk if I help you?" "Let's find out." Getting Colt from the bed to the kitchen trapdoor was a slow, painful process that left them both sweating despite the morning chill. His wound had opened slightly during the night, fresh blood seeping through the bandages, and Clara made a mental note to change them as soon as she had him secured. The cellar, when they finally got the trapdoor open, was dark and smelled of earth and stored vegetables. But it was solid and safe, a good place to hide if things went wrong. "There's the tunnel I mentioned," Clara said, pointing to a low opening in the far wall. "Comes out behind the barn. My father dug it years ago as an escape route in case of Indian attack. Never thought I'd actually need to use it." "Hope we don't have to," Colt said, lowering himself carefully onto a crate of potatoes. "But it's good to know it's there." Claire retrieved fresh bandages and redressed his wound by the light of a lantern. The bullet hole looked angry and inflamed, but there was no sign of the deep infection she'd feared. With proper care and a lot of luck, he might actually survive this. "Now what?" Colt asked when she was finished. "Now I go back up and prepare the cabin, barricade the windows, make sure I have clean lines of fire, position ammunition where I can reach it easily. If they come, I want to be ready." "I should be up there with you." "You can barely stand," Clara pointed out pragmatically. "You'd be more liability than help. No, you stay down here and stay quiet. If shooting starts, you head for the tunnel and don't look back." "Understood?" "Clara, sit." "Understood?" she repeated firmly. He held her gaze for a long moment, and she saw frustration and determination and something else in his eyes, something that looked almost like admiration. Finally, he nodded. "Understood. But if things go bad, if you need me, you call out. I'll come, even if I have to crawl. Deal." She stood, preparing to head back up, but Colt caught her hand. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for everything. For not turning me away. For patching me up. For standing with me when you had every right to run. I won't forget it." Clara squeezed his hand once, then let go. "Let's worry about surviving first. You can thank me later when all this is over." She climbed back up through the trapdoor and lowered it carefully, covering it with the kitchen rug. Then she set about transforming the cabin into a fortress. She moved the table against the door, reinforcing it with chairs. She positioned her father's rifle near the front window where she'd have the best view of anyone approaching. She filled pots and buckets with water in case they tried to burn the place. She laid out ammunition in multiple locations so she wouldn't be caught empty-handed. And then she waited. The sun climbed higher, warming the valley, turning the frost on the grass to glittering diamonds. Birds sang in the pines. Somewhere in the distance, a hawk screamed. It was a beautiful morning, the kind that made you glad to be alive. Clara tried to appreciate it, tried to hold on to the peace while it lasted. She didn't have to wait long. Around mid-morning, she spotted movement on the ridge to the east, 4 riders silhouetted against the sky, sitting their horses and looking down at her cabin. Even at this distance, she could sense their focus, their intention. They'd found what they were looking for. Clara's heart began to pound, but her hands were steady as she checked her rifle and settled into position by the window. Behind her, under the floorboards, Colt Mercer lay hidden. Between him and the men on the ridge stood one woman with one gun and an absolute refusal to back down. "Come on, then," Clara whispered to the distant riders. Let's see what you've got. The riders started down the slope, moving slowly, cautiously, spread out in a loose line. They knew their business, Clara realized. These weren't amateurs or reckless young guns. These were experienced killers, professionals who'd done this before and knew how to stay alive while they worked. 4 of them. She'd hoped for fewer. As they drew closer, Clara could make out details. The man in front was big, riding a black stallion that looked as mean as its master. That would be Travis Blackwell. Even from here, she could see the scar Colt had described. To his left rode a thin man on a paint horse, his hand resting on his pistol. Hawkins, probably. On the right, a huge bull of a man who seemed too large for his mount. Pike. And bringing up the rear, a younger man with sharp eyes that swept constantly across the terrain. Garrett. 4 killers. 1 woman, 1 wounded cowboy. The odds weren't good, but Clara Weston had never been one to run from bad odds. She'd been facing them alone for 3 years now, ever since her father had died and left her to defend this land by herself. She'd fought off wolves and bears and drunken trappers who thought a woman alone was easy prey. She'd survived winters that would have broken most men and summers that baked the land to dust. She'd learned to shoot straight and dig deep and never, ever give up. And she wasn't about to start now. The riders stopped about 50 yards from the cabin, just out of comfortable rifle range. Smart. Blackwell dismounted and the others followed suit. They stood in a line, studying the cabin, clearly planning their approach. Clara kept her rifle trained on Blackwell's chest and waited. It was Blackwell who called out, his voice carrying clearly across the distance. "Hello, the house! We're looking for a man, wounded, probably riding a bay mare. Seen anyone like that?" Clara didn't answer. Couldn't answer without giving away her position. "Now, we don't want any trouble," Blackwell continued, his tone almost reasonable. "We're just looking for this particular fella. He's wanted for murder back in Laramie. We're deputized by the sheriff there to bring him back for trial. So if he came by here, if you helped him, you're not in any trouble. Just tell us where he is and we'll be on our way." Lies, all of it. Clara had heard enough stories about the Blackwell gang to know they weren't deputies of anything except hell itself. But the smoothness of the deception worried her. How many other homesteaders had they fooled with this same story? How many people had opened their doors thinking they were helping the law, only to end up dead in a ditch? When she still didn't respond, Blackwell's tone hardened. "We know he came this way. We followed his blood trail right to your door. Now, I'm trying to be civilized about this, but my patience has limits. Either you come out and talk to us peaceful-like, or we're going to have to assume you're hiding a fugitive. And that would make you an accomplice. You understand what I'm saying?" Clara's finger tightened on the trigger. She could take him now, drop Blackwell with 1 shot while he stood there speechless. But the moment she fired, his men would scatter and return fire, and she'd be stuck in here with limited ammunition and no way to know if she'd hit anyone else. Better to wait, to make them commit to a course of action first. Blackwell waited another minute, then nodded to his men. "Garrett, check the barn. Pike, you and Hawkins circle around back. I want to know every way in and out of this place. And if anyone's in there," he raised his voice again, "if anyone's in there, you've got about 5 minutes to reconsider your position before things get unpleasant." The men moved out, and Clara tracked them with her rifle, her heart hammering. This was it, the moment she'd been preparing for all night. In a few minutes, maybe less, the shooting would start, and there would be no going back. From beneath the floorboards came a soft sound. Colt, shifting position, probably trying to hear what was happening. Clara hoped he had the sense to stay put no matter what he heard. If he came up too soon, before she'd thinned their numbers, they'd both die. Garrett reached the barn and disappeared inside. Pike and Hawkins were moving around the sides of the cabin, checking windows, looking for weaknesses. Blackwell stood in the center of the yard, his hand on his pistol, his scarred face expressionless. Waiting. Clara made her decision. She aimed carefully, leading Hawkins by just a hair, and squeezed the trigger. The rifle shot shattered the morning quiet like thunder. Hawkins went down hard, clutching his leg, screaming. Pike dove for cover behind the well. Blackwell drew his pistol in one smooth motion and fired 3 shots through the front window, shattering glass, forcing Clara to duck. From the barn came more gunfire. Garrett, shooting blindly toward the cabin, keeping her pinned down. "So that's how it's going to be," Blackwell roared. "Fine, we'll do this the hard way." Clara scrambled to a different window, one that gave her a view of the barn, and fired twice more. She saw Garrett duck back inside, saw Pike running for better cover. The wounded Hawkins was trying to drag himself toward his horse, leaving a trail of blood in the frost-brittle grass. 3-1 now, if she counted Hawkins out of the fight. Still bad odds, but better than they'd been. More shots from outside, splintering wood, sending splinters flying. Clara kept moving, never staying in one place too long, firing from different windows, trying to keep them guessing about how many people were actually inside. The cabin filled with smoke and noise, the sharp tang of gunpowder burning her nose and throat. And beneath it all, under the floor, she could hear Colt moving, getting ready, preparing for whatever came next. Together, Clara whispered to herself, working the rifle's action, chambering another round. We face this together. Outside, the Blackwell gang was regrouping, preparing for their next assault. Inside, a woman who refused to run was preparing to defend her home to her last breath. The war for Clara Weston's cabin had begun. The gunfire died away as quickly as it had erupted, leaving behind an eerie silence broken only by Hawkins's moaning and the nervous stamping of horses. Clara pressed herself against the wall beside the shattered window, her breath coming in short gasps, her hands slick with sweat despite the cold. She'd drawn first blood, but that would only make them angrier, more determined. Blackwell wasn't the type of man to walk away from a fight, especially not after losing face in front of his crew. "You made a big mistake, lady!" Blackwell's voice cut through the quiet like a blade. "Could have walked away from this. Could have just told us where the man was and lived to see another sunrise. But you had to go and shoot one of mine. Now? Now this is personal." Clara didn't respond, saving her breath and her ammunition. Let him talk. Every minute he spent shouting was a minute she could use to reload, to reposition, to think. She ejected the spent cartridges and fed fresh rounds into the rifle's magazine, her fingers working automatically through years of practice. Her father had taught her to shoot when she was 12, and she'd been practicing ever since. Thank God for that now. Through a gap in the curtains, she could see Garrett emerging from the barn, moving in quick bursts from cover to cover, working his way closer to the cabin. Pike was somewhere out back. She'd lost sight of him after that initial exchange. Hawkins had managed to drag himself behind his horse, using the animal as a shield while he tried to bind his leg. The wound was high on his thigh, bleeding badly. He'd live if they got him to a doctor, but he was out of the fight for now. That left Blackwell and 2 able-bodied men against her. Still terrible odds, but survivable if she was smart and lucky in equal measure. "I know you can hear me," Blackwell called out again, "and I know you're alone in there." A woman's voice, that's what Pike says. No man would send a woman out to do his fighting. So that means our friend Colt Mercer is either dead already or too shot up to help you. Either way, you're on your own, sweetheart, and that's a real shame because you shoot pretty good. Under different circumstances, I might have offered you a job. Despite everything, Clara felt a cold smile touch her lips. Offered her a job. As if she'd ever work for a man like Travis Blackwell, a man who murdered people for land and money and the simple pleasure of watching them die. She'd put a bullet through her own head before she'd take orders from him. Below her feet, she heard movement in the cellar. Colt, shifting position, probably desperate to know what was happening. She wanted to call down to him, to let him know she was all right, but any sound might give away his position. Better to keep them thinking she was alone. Let them underestimate the situation. That might be the edge she needed. "Tell you what," Blackwell continued, his tone turning almost conversational, "I'm a reasonable man. You come out right now, hands up, and we'll call this whole thing a misunderstanding. You tell us where Mercer is, we take him and go, and you get to keep breathing. Hell, I'll even pay for the window. Can't say fairer than that." Clara's eyes flicked to the medicine chest on the far wall where she kept her father's old Navy Colt revolver. The rifle was good for distance, but if they breached the cabin, she'd need something she could use in close quarters. The problem was getting to it without exposing herself to fire from the windows. "No answer?" Blackwell's voice had lost its false friendliness. "Fine. Have it your way. Boys, burn it." Clara's blood turned to ice. She'd prepared for a lot of things, but fire was her nightmare scenario. The cabin was old, the wood dry despite the season, and there was only so much water she'd been able to store. If they set the place ablaze, she'd have to choose between burning alive and running out into their guns. She had to stop them before they could get close enough to torch the walls. Through the window, she saw Pike emerge from behind the chicken coop, moving fast toward the cabin's east wall, something dark in his hand. A torch. She swung the rifle around, tracking his movement, leading him just slightly to account for his speed. Her finger found the trigger, squeezed. The rifle cracked, and Pike stumbled, the torch flying from his hand to land harmlessly in the dirt. But he wasn't down, just wounded, and he scrambled back behind cover before Clara could get off a second shot. Damn! She'd been aiming for center mass, but she must have pulled the shot. Her hands were shaking more than she'd realized. Steady, she whispered to herself. Keep it steady. More gunfire from the barn, Garrett laying down covering fire while Pike retreated. Bullets punched through the cabin walls, one of them passing so close to Clara's head she felt the wind of its passage. She dropped flat, crawling toward the kitchen, toward that trap door and the reassurance that Colt was still safe below. Clara! His voice came up through the floorboards, urgent and frightened. Clara, what's happening? Stay down, she hissed back. They're trying to burn us out. I wounded another one, but they're still coming. Let me up. Give me a gun. I can help. You can barely stand. You come up here now, you'll just get killed. And then this was all for nothing. She was at the trapdoor now, her hand pressed flat against the wood, as if she could transmit strength and courage through the planks. Trust me, Colt. Please. Just trust me a little longer. There was a pause, and then his voice came again, quieter now. I trust you. But Clara, if they set the place on fire, then I'll come down and we'll use the tunnel. But we're not there yet. I can still hold them off. She hoped that was true. Clara crawled back to her position by the window, her rifle at the ready. Outside, the gang was regrouping, adjusting their strategy. Pike was clutching his shoulder, blood seeping between his fingers. She'd hit him after all, just not as solidly as she'd hoped. Hawkins was still down, his horse starting to wander away from the smell of blood. That left Blackwell and Garrett as her primary threats. And they were nowhere to be seen. That was bad. When you couldn't see the enemy, that's when they were most dangerous. Clara's eyes swept the terrain, searching for any sign of movement, any hint of where they'd positioned themselves. The barn was the obvious choice for Garrett. He'd had time to get comfortable there, to find good firing positions. But Blackwell could be anywhere. Behind the well, behind the woodpile, even working his way around to the back door if he was bold enough. The minutes crawled past, each one feeling like an hour. The silence was worse than the gunfire had been, heavy with anticipation and dread. Clara's hands ached from gripping the rifle so tightly, and sweat dripped into her eyes despite the cold air seeping through the broken windows. Every shadow looked like a threat. Every sound made her flinch. Then she saw it. A flash of movement at the tree line, 50 yards out. Someone was flanking wide, trying to circle around to the back of the cabin, where the walls had fewer windows, fewer angles of fire. Clever. If they got behind her, she'd be caught in a crossfire with no good options. Clara made a decision. She couldn't defend every approach at once, not alone. She needed to force them to come at her from one direction, where she could concentrate her fire. And that meant taking the fight to them. Colt, she called down through the floorboards. I'm going to make some noise. When I do, I need you to be ready to run if things go wrong. You hear me? If this goes bad, you use that tunnel and you don't look back. What are you going to do? Something stupid, Clara admitted, but it might just work. Be ready. She didn't wait for his response. Instead, she grabbed the lantern from the table, checked to make sure it was full of oil, and smashed it against the far wall. The oil splashed across the wood, and she followed it with a match. Flames roared to life, climbing the wall with terrifying speed, filling the cabin with light and heat and smoke. She's burning her own place, Pike's voice, shocked and disbelieving. The crazy bitch is burning her own place. Clara was already moving, out the back door and into the cold morning air, the rifle clutched in her hands. She ran in a crouch toward the woodpile, using it for cover, her eyes scanning frantically for targets. If her gamble paid off, the fire would draw them in, make them think she'd panicked, make them expose themselves trying to either escape or finish her off. And there, Garrett, emerging from the barn, drawn by the flames like a moth. Clara didn't hesitate. She brought the rifle up, sighted down the barrel, and fired. The shot took him high in the chest, spinning him around. He went down hard and didn't get back up. 2 down, 2 wounded. just Blackwell left at full strength. But where was he? The answer came in the form of an arm around her throat, dragging her backward, the rifle torn from her hands. Clara gasped, clawing at the arm, her boots scraping uselessly in the dirt. Blackwell had circled behind while she'd been focused on Garrett, had waited for her to commit to her attack, and now he had her. "Got you," he breathed in her ear, his voice cold and triumphant. "Thought you were clever, didn't you? Thought you could outsmart Travis Blackwell?" "Nobody outsmarts me, lady. Nobody." Clara drove her elbow back into his ribs with all the strength she could muster, but it was like hitting a wall. Blackwell just laughed and tightened his grip, cutting off her air. Black spots danced at the edges of her vision. She was going to pass out. She was going to die here in the dirt, strangled by a monster, and Colt would be next. No, she hadn't survived 3 years alone in the wilderness, hadn't fought off bears and wolves and men who thought they could take what they wanted just to die like this. She hadn't saved Colt's life only to fail him now. Clara's hand found the knife on her belt, the same knife she'd used to dig the bullet out of Colt's side. Her fingers closed around the handle, and she pulled it free and drove it backward, blind, desperate. She felt it sink into something soft, heard Blackwell grunt in pain, felt his grip loosen just slightly. It was enough. She twisted free, falling to her knees, gasping for air. Blackwell staggered back, the knife buried in his thigh, his face twisted in rage and pain. His hand went for his gun, and Clara knew she had maybe a second before he drew and ended this. The gunshot came from behind her, loud and sharp, and Blackwell jerked backward, a red flower blooming on his shoulder. He fired twice, wild shots that went wide, and then another bullet caught him in the side, spinning him around. He hit the ground hard and stayed there, his gun falling from his fingers. Clara turned, her breath still coming in ragged gasps, and saw Colt Mercer standing in the cabin's back doorway. He was pale as death, swaying on his feet, his bandages soaked through with fresh blood. But the Navy Colt revolver in his hand was steady as stone, and his eyes were clear and hard as he kept it trained on Blackwell's prone form. "You all right?" he asked, his voice rough but calm. "I told you to stay down," Clara managed, her own voice shaking. "You did," Colt agreed, "but I never was good at following orders. Besides, you said we face this together, remember? Can't do that from a cellar." Despite everything, the pain, the fear, the adrenaline still screaming through her system, Clara felt a laugh bubble up in her throat. It came out half sob, but it was real. "You're an idiot." "Probably," Colt said, "but I'm an idiot who just saved your life, so maybe cut me some slack." The cabin was burning in earnest now, flames visible through the windows, smoke pouring from the door Colt had emerged from. Clara looked at it, looked at the home her father had built with his own hands, and felt something break in her chest. Everything she owned was in there, her father's tools, her mother's wedding dress, 3 years of memories and survival and stubborn refusal to give up, all of it turning to ash. "Clara," Colt's voice pulled her back. "We need to go. The fire's going to draw attention, and we've got wounded men who might recover enough to cause trouble. We need to move while we still can." He was right, the fight wasn't over yet. Pike was wounded but mobile. Hawkins was down but not dead. And Blackwell? Clara turned to look at him. Blackwell was on his back, bleeding from his shoulder and side, but his chest was still rising and falling, still alive, still dangerous if they gave him the chance. "The horses," Clara said, forcing herself to think, to plan. "We take their horses and ride for Fork Creek. The sheriff there, Thomas Brennan, he's a good man. He'll help us." "Can you ride?" Colt asked, eyeing her with concern. The marks of Blackwell's arm were already darkening on her throat, and she could feel her voice going hoarse. "Can you?" she shot back, taking in his blood-soaked bandages, the way he leaned against the door frame to stay upright. "Guess we'll both have to manage." He offered her his hand, and she took it, letting him pull her to her feet. For a moment they stood there, hands clasped, looking at each other with a new understanding. They'd been through fire together, literally and figuratively. They'd saved each other's lives. Whatever they'd been before this morning, strangers, barely acquaintances, they were something else now, partners, allies, maybe more, though neither was ready to examine that too closely yet. "Together," Clara said softly. "Together," Colt agreed. They moved quickly, gathering what they could salvage. The gang's horses had scattered during the fight, but Clara managed to catch 3 of them: Blackwell's big black stallion, Garrett's roan, and Hawkins's paint. The animals were nervous from the gunfire and smoke, but Clara had a way with horses, a gentleness that calmed them even in chaos. She tied them to the fence while Colt kept watch, his revolver trained on the wounded men. Pike had disappeared at some point during the fight, probably crawled off into the woods to hide or die. Hawkins was unconscious, his breathing shallow. And Blackwell was watching them through slitted eyes, his jaw clenched against pain, murder burning in his gaze. "You're making a mistake," he rasped as Clara passed close to check his weapons. "You think you can run? You think you can testify against me and live? I've got friends in every town from here to Montana, lawmen in my pocket. You're dead, both of you. You just don't know it yet." "Maybe," Clara said, removing his gun belt and tossing it out of reach. "But you're not going to be the one to kill us. That's something, at least." She found rope in the barn, miraculously untouched by the flames, and tied Blackwell's hands behind his back, then did the same for the unconscious Hawkins. Not the most elegant solution, but it would have to do. With luck, someone would find them before they died of their wounds. Without luck, well, Clara found it hard to feel much sympathy for men who'd come here to murder. "We should take them with us," Colt said, watching her work. "Turn them over to the sheriff in Fort Creek. It'd strengthen our case." "We can barely ride ourselves," Clara pointed out. "How are we supposed to manage 2 wounded prisoners? No, we leave them. Let the law come back for them if they're still here." "And if they're not? If Pike comes back for them? Then at least they're not our problem anymore." Clara finished with the ropes and stood, wiping her hands on her pants. Everything she was wearing was covered in blood and dirt and soot. She probably looked like she'd crawled out of hell itself. "We've done what we can here, Colt. Now we need to save ourselves." Colt looked like he wanted to argue, but a glance at the burning cabin seemed to change his mind. The roof was starting to collapse, timbers falling inward with crashes and showers of sparks. Soon there would be nothing left but ashes and the stone chimney, a monument to what had been. "I'm sorry," Colt said quietly. "You're home. Everything you had." "It's just wood and nails," Clara interrupted, though her voice caught on the words. "I'm alive. You're alive. That's what matters. The rest we can rebuild. If we survive long enough," she didn't add. "If Blackwell's threats were empty. If the law believed them instead of the gang's lies." So many ifs, stretching out into an uncertain future. But that was a problem for later. Right now, they needed to ride. Getting Colt into the saddle was an ordeal that left them both shaking. His wound had torn open during the fight, and he'd lost more blood than was safe. Clara could see it in his face, in the way his skin had gone from pale to gray, in the tremor of his hands as he gripped the saddle horn. He needed a doctor, needed rest and proper medical care, not a desperate ride through rough country. But they didn't have a choice. Clara mounted Garrett's roan, taking the reins of the black stallion, loaded with supplies she'd grabbed from the barn, and leading it behind. Colt sat hunched on Hawkins's paint, looking like a strong wind might blow him right out of the saddle. But his eyes were determined, and when Clara asked if he was ready, he nodded. "Let's go," he said, "before I change my mind and pass out." They rode east, away from the burning cabin and the wounded men and the life Clara had built for herself over 3 hard years. The morning sun was bright in their faces, warming them, and behind them the column of smoke rose like a signal fire, visible for miles. Someone would see it. Someone would come to investigate. Clara just hoped they'd be far enough away by then that it wouldn't matter. The ride to Fort Creek was going to be the longest 15 miles of her life. The first hour passed in tense silence. Both of them focused simply on staying mounted and putting distance between themselves and the cabin. The terrain was rough, rolling hills covered in pine and aspen, with rocky outcroppings that forced them to detour and lose precious time. Clara's throat ached where Blackwell had grabbed her, and every swallow felt like broken glass. But she didn't complain, didn't suggest they stop. Not when Colt was barely conscious, swaying dangerously with every step his horse took. "Talk to me," she said finally, when his eyes started to drift closed. "Colt, you need to stay awake. Tell me something, anything." "Like what?" His voice was slurred, distant. Tell me about Texas, about your ranch before you lost it. What was it like? He was quiet for so long she thought he'd passed out after all. Then he said softly, "It was beautiful. 100 acres of good grassland, a creek that ran year-round, mountains in the distance. My father built the main house when I was just a boy. Used to help him, carrying boards, holding nails. Thought I'd live there my whole life. Thought I'd raise my own sons there someday, teach them to work cattle like my father taught me." What happened? The drought happened. 3 years without decent rain. The grass died, the creek dried up, the cattle started dropping. We tried everything, drove them north looking for better grazing, took loans from the bank to buy feed. But it wasn't enough. By the time the rains finally came, we were too deep in debt to recover. Bank foreclosed, sold everything at auction. He paused, and Clara could hear the pain in his voice when he continued. Watched strangers bid on my life. My father's life. All of it gone in an afternoon. "I'm sorry," Clara said, and meant it. She knew what it was like to lose everything, to watch your world crumble and be powerless to stop it. "Is that when you partnered with Bill Hendricks?" "Yeah. We'd known each other for years, worked trail drives together when we were younger. He'd lost his place too, different reasons but same result. We figured if we pooled our money, bought cheaper land up north, we might have a chance. And we did have a chance, right up until Blackwell put bullets in Bill's back." The bitterness in his voice was sharp enough to cut. Clara understood that too. The rage that came from watching someone you cared about die senselessly, murdered by people who saw other lives as inconveniences to be eliminated. She'd felt it when her father had died, though his death had been illness rather than violence. The unfairness of it, the waste, the howling emptiness left behind. "What about you?" Colt asked, rallying slightly. "That cabin, your father's land. How long had you been there?" "All my life," Clara said. "I was born in that cabin. My mother died bringing me into the world, and my father never remarried. Said he had me and the land, and that was enough. He taught me everything, how to shoot, how to trap, how to survive winters that would freeze your blood. He taught me to be strong. He did a good job." Clara felt tears prick her eyes but blinked them away. Now wasn't the time. "He died 3 years ago. I was 27, old enough that people thought I should have been married already, safely tucked away in some town where women belong. But I'd never wanted that. I wanted the land, the freedom, the challenge of making it on my own. So when father died, I stayed. Everyone said I was crazy, that a woman alone couldn't survive out there. I wanted to prove them wrong." "You did," Colt said. "You fought off a gang of killers. I'd say that counts as survival. I lost my home doing it. But you're alive. That's what your father would have wanted, isn't it? He didn't raise you to be strong just so you could die defending empty walls. He raised you to survive, whatever that took." Clara wanted to argue, wanted to say that the cabin had been more than empty walls, that it had been her history and her identity and her last connection to the man who'd raised her. But deep down, she knew Colt was right. Her father would have told her to run, to save herself, to let the cabin burn if that's what it took to live another day. He taught her that survival mattered more than pride, more than property, more than anything except maybe honor. And there was honor in what they'd done, in standing up to evil men, in refusing to be victims, in fighting for each other even when the smart thing would have been to run. "Thank you," Clara said quietly, "for coming up from that cellar, for shooting Blackwell, for saving my life." "You saved mine first," Colt pointed out. "Figure that makes us even." "I don't think it works that way." "No. How does it work, then?" Clara considered that as they rode, the horses picking their way carefully through a stand of aspen, golden leaves drifting down around them like snow. How did it work when two people saved each other? When they fought together, bled together, survived together? What obligation did that create? What bond? "I think," she said slowly, "it means we're tied together now. What happens to one happens to both. We see this through to the end, whatever that end might be." "Together," Colt said, and there was something in his voice that made her look over at him. His eyes were clearer now, focused on her with an intensity that had nothing to do with his injuries. "I can live with that." The sun climbed higher, and they rode on. By midday, Clara knew they were in trouble. Colt had been fading for the last hour, his grip on the reins growing weaker, his head drooping forward onto his chest. Twice she'd had to call his name sharply to wake him, and the second time it had taken longer for him to respond. He was losing too much blood, and the ride was taking too much out of him. If they didn't stop soon, he was going to fall out of the saddle and potentially kill himself. But stopping meant exposure, meant being easy targets if Pike had recovered enough to follow, meant losing precious time getting to Fort Creek and the safety of the law. Clara weighed the options and hated all of them. "Colt," she called over, "we need to rest. You need rest." "Can't stop," he mumbled. "Need to keep moving. You need to not die," Clara interrupted firmly. She pulled her horse to a halt and dismounted, then moved to his side, reaching up to steady him. "Come on, down you come. There's a stream up ahead, I can hear it. We'll stop there, get you cleaned up, maybe eat something. 20 minutes, that's all. Then we ride again." 20 minutes, Colt agreed, and when he tried to dismount, his legs buckled and he would have fallen if Clara hadn't caught him. Again. She seemed to be making a habit of catching this man when he fell. The stream was cold and clear, running fast over smooth stones. Clara helped Colt to the bank and got him situated with his back against a tree, then went to work checking his bandages. They were soaked through, the wounds seeping steadily. She'd need to change them, clean the area, try to stop the bleeding before they went any further. "This is going to hurt," she warned, reaching for the buttons of his shirt. "Everything hurts," Colt said, but he managed a weak smile. "Do what you need to do." Clara worked as quickly and gently as she could, cleaning the wound with cold stream water, packing it with clean cloth torn from her own shirt, binding it tight. The bullet hole looked worse than it had this morning, inflamed and angry, seeping not just blood but clear fluid that spoke of infection setting in. He needed real medical care, antibiotics if Fort Creek had any, possibly surgery to clean out damaged tissue. What he needed, she couldn't give him here, but she could buy him time. That would have to be enough. "Better?" she asked when she'd finished. "Better," Colt lied, and they both knew it was a lie. But what else could they say? They were in this now, committed to a course of action that might kill them both. All they could do was keep moving forward and hope they lasted long enough to reach help. Clara pulled out the food she'd grabbed from the cabin, hard biscuits, some dried venison, a canteen of water. They ate in silence, neither of them tasting the food, just refueling for the ride ahead. Around them, the forest was quiet, peaceful even. Birds sang in the trees. The stream babbled cheerfully over its rocks. It was the kind of moment that should have been restful, restorative. Instead, Claire couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. She scanned the tree line, her hand never far from the rifle she'd propped against the tree. Nothing moved. Nothing seemed out of place. But the feeling persisted, a prickling at the back of her neck, an animal instinct that said danger was close. "You feel it too," Colt said quietly. It wasn't a question. "Yeah. Could be Pike. Could be someone else Blackwell had watching the roads." "Could be nothing," Clara said, but she didn't believe it. "We should move. Now." They mounted up again, Clara helping Colt into his saddle, and resumed their ride east. The feeling of being watched followed them, growing stronger with each mile. Clara kept looking back, expecting to see riders on their trail, but the land behind them remained empty. Empty, but not safe. Never safe. "Tell me about Fort Creek," Colt said, clearly trying to keep himself alert. "You said the sheriff's a good man. You know him well?" "Well enough. He came out my way, a few times a year to check on me. Thought it was his duty to make sure the crazy woman in the woods hadn't been eaten by bears." Clara smiled slightly at the memory. "Thomas Brennan. He's older, probably 60 now, but still tough as boot leather. Fought in the war, lost his wife to cholera back in the 50s. He's fair, doesn't abide lawlessness, and he's got no love for the Blackwell gang. They've been a thorn in his side for years. Think he'll believe our story? I think the bullet hole in your side and the marks on my throat will do a lot of the convincing for us," Clara said. "Plus, we've got Blackwell's horse and gear. That's evidence. And if Pike or the others are still alive back at the cabin, they're evidence too. If they're alive. If someone finds them before they bleed out or escape." "One crisis at a time," Clara said, echoing her father's old advice. We get to Fort Creek, we tell the sheriff everything, and we let him handle it from there. That's all we can do." But even as she said it, Clara wondered if it would be enough. Blackwell had boasted about having lawmen in his pocket, about having friends in every town. What if Sheriff Brennan was one of them? What if they rode into Fort Creek only to find themselves arrested for murder, or worse, turned over to whatever remained of the Blackwell gang? The uncertainty gnawed at her, but she pushed it aside. They'd made their choice. Now they had to see it through. The afternoon wore on, the sun beginning its slow descent toward the western peaks. Claire's body ached from the ride, from the fight, from 3 hours of running on pure adrenaline and fear. Beside her, Colt was barely conscious, held in the saddle more by stubbornness than strength. They needed to reach Fort Creek soon or they wouldn't reach it at all. And then finally, she saw it. Smoke rising from chimneys, the glint of sunlight on glass windows, the geometric shapes of buildings against the natural landscape. Fork Creek, small and ramshackle, and the most beautiful thing Clara had seen in her entire life. "Colt," she said urgently. "Colt, wake up. We're here. We made it." His eyes opened, struggled to focus. When he saw the town ahead, something like relief crossed his face. "Made it," he repeated. "We actually made it." "Don't celebrate yet," Clara warned. "We still need to—" The gunshot cracked across the distance, and Colt's horse screamed and went down, throwing him hard into the dirt. Clara wheeled her mount around, searching for the source of the shot, and saw him, Pike, emerging from the rocks 50 yards behind them, blood-soaked and furious, working the lever of his rifle for another shot. "Son of a bitch followed us," Clara breathed, and then there was no more time for words. She was moving, kicking her horse into a gallop toward where Colt lay, stunned on the ground, praying she could reach him before Pike's next bullet did. Pike's second shot went wide as Clara's horse charged forward, but the third grazed her shoulder, burning like a hot iron pressed against skin. She ignored the pain, focused only on reaching Colt, who was struggling to rise from where he'd fallen. His horse was thrashing in the dirt, screaming, a horrible sound that cut through everything else. The animal had been hit in the leg, not killed outright, and its agony filled the air. Clara reached Colt just as Pike fired again. She didn't dismount, couldn't afford to, instead reaching down and grabbing Colt's arm with strength born of desperation. "Hold on!" she shouted and kicked her horse hard. The roan leaped forward, and Colt held on with both hands as she dragged him, his boots scraping across the ground. It wasn't elegant, and it sure as hell wasn't comfortable. But after 20 yards, she managed to haul him up behind her, his arms wrapping around her waist, his weight nearly pulling them both off. "Go!" Colt gasped against her ear. "Just go!" The roan was already running, hooves pounding the hard earth, mane flying. Behind them, Pike was trying to mount the black stallion they'd been leading, but the animal was spooked by the gunfire and rearing, buying them precious seconds. Clara leaned forward over the horse's neck, urging every ounce of speed from the exhausted animal, while Colt held on behind her, his grip growing weaker with each stride. Fort Creek was close now, close enough that she could make out individual buildings, could see people on the street stopping to stare at the commotion. A woman riding hell-bent with a man clinging behind her, blood streaming from both of them, and a madman with a rifle pursuing them through the sagebrush. It was the kind of scene that would be talked about for years in a small town like this, assuming they lived long enough for there to be talk. Another shot, this one close enough that Clara felt the bullet pass between them. Pike had gotten mounted and was pursuing now, closing the distance on the fresher horse. Clara's roan was giving everything it had, but 15 miles of hard riding had taken their toll. The horse was flagging, its breath coming in great heaving gasps, foam flying from its mouth. They weren't going to make it to town. Not like this. "Clara," Colt said, his voice tight with pain and determination. "Stop the horse." "Are you insane?" "Stop the horse," he repeated. "We can't outrun him, but we can fight him. Together, remember?" Clara wanted to argue, wanted to keep running, but she knew he was right. They were sitting targets like this, and the horse was about to collapse beneath them anyway. Better to make a stand on their own terms than to be shot in the back while fleeing. She pulled hard on the reins, and the roan stopped so suddenly that Colt nearly slid off. They both dismounted, Clara grabbing her rifle from where she'd tied it to the saddle, Colt drawing the revolver he'd somehow managed to hold on to through everything. They had maybe 30 seconds before Pike reached them, 30 seconds to find cover and prepare. There wasn't much. A scattering of rocks, a depression in the earth that might stop a bullet if they got lucky. Clara and Colt dropped into the depression, using it for what little protection it offered, their weapons trained on the rider bearing down on them. Pike saw them stop and pulled up short, dismounting about 50 yards out. Smart. He'd use the distance to his advantage, keep them pinned down with rifle fire while he worked his way closer. Clara could see the plan forming, could see how this would end if they didn't do something to change the odds. "Can you shoot straight?" she asked Colt quietly. "Straight enough at this range. You?" "Same." Clara's shoulder throbbed where Pike's bullet had grazed her, but her hands were steady. Years of hunting had taught her to ignore pain, to focus only on the target. "On 3, we both fire. Might get lucky, might not, but we'll make him think twice about charging in." "And if we don't get lucky?" "Then we were dead anyway. At least this way we go down fighting." Colt laughed, a sound that was half cough, half genuine amusement. "You're a hell of a woman, Clara Weston. You know that?" "You mentioned it before," Clara said, and felt a smile tug at her lips despite everything. Strange that she could smile now, with death maybe seconds away. But there was something freeing about it too, about knowing you'd done everything you could, fought as hard as you could, and whatever came next was out of your hands. 1, she counted softly. Pike was moving now, using the rocks for cover, working his way around to get a better angle. He was good at this, Clara realized. Had probably done it 100 times before, stalking prey, human or otherwise, across open country. 2. Colt shifted beside her, adjusting his aim, his breathing slow and controlled despite his injuries. Whatever else he was a man who knew how to handle himself in a fight. Texas born and bred, probably been shooting since he could walk. 3. They fired together, the crack of rifle and pistol blending into one sound. Clara saw Pike jerk sideways, saw him stumble, but he didn't go down. Her shot had hit him somewhere, shoulder or arm maybe, but not solid enough to stop him. Colt's shot had missed entirely, or maybe grazed him at best. Pike returned fire, 3 quick shots that sent Clara and Colt pressing themselves flat against the earth. Bullets kicked up dirt inches from Clara's face, and she tasted grit, felt the sting of sand against her skin. When the volley ended, she rolled to a new position and fired again, working the rifle's lever action, sending bullets downrange as fast as she could aim. One of them found its mark. Pike went down hard this time, clutching his leg, his rifle falling from his hands. He crawled for it, leaving a trail of blood in the dust, his face twisted in pain and rage. Clara stood, walking forward with the rifle at her shoulder, her eyes never leaving Pike's prone form. Colt was beside her, limping badly but upright, the revolver trained on the fallen man. Together they approached, 2 wounded souls who'd survived hell and weren't about to let the devil's lieutenant finish what his boss had started. "Don't!" Pike gasped, his hand finally reaching his rifle. "Don't you come any closer. I swear I'll—" "You'll what?" Clara said coldly, kicking the rifle away from his grasping fingers. "You're shot in the leg and the shoulder. You've lost blood, you're alone, and you're done. It's over, Pike. You lost. Blackwell will kill you," Pike spat. "He'll hunt you down, both of you, and he'll make you suffer before you die." "You don't know what you've done," crossing him. "You don't know—" "We know plenty," Colt interrupted. He looked terrible, barely able to stand, but his voice was hard as iron. "We know you and your boss are murderers. We know you killed my friend Bill Hendricks in cold blood. We know you came to Clara's home to kill her just for helping me. And we know that as of right now, you're under citizen's arrest for attempted murder, and we're taking you to the sheriff in Fort Creek to face justice." Pike laughed, a wet, bubbling sound. "Justice? In Fort Creek? You really are as stupid as you look, Cowboy. Brennan's been in Blackwell's pocket for 2 years. You walk into that town, you're walking into a trap." Clara felt ice form in her stomach. "You're lying." "Am I? Why do you think Blackwell operates so freely around here? Why do you think none of his men ever get arrested, no matter what they do?" Pike coughed, blood flecking his lips. "Brennan takes his cut, looks the other way, and everyone's happy. Well, everyone except the poor bastards who get in the way." Clara looked at Colt, saw her own uncertainty reflected in his eyes. Could it be true? Had Sheriff Brennan, the man who'd checked on her for years, who'd seemed so honest and fair, been working for the Blackwell gang all along? Or was this just Pike's last desperate attempt to save himself, to sow doubt and fear? Only one way to find out, Colt said quietly, reading her thoughts. We go into town, we tell our story, and we see how Brennan reacts. And if Pike's telling the truth, if we walk into that sheriff's office and Brennan arrests us or worse, then we fight our way out. Colt's smile was grim. We've made it this far, haven't we? What's one more impossible situation? Despite everything, Clara felt that same smile tug at her own lips. He was right. They'd survived the cabin fight, survived the ride, survived Pike's ambush. At this point, what was one potentially corrupt sheriff? Can you walk? She asked Pike, who was still on the ground, glaring up at them with pure hatred. What's it look like? Then we'll help you, Clara said, surprising herself with the words. But leaving him here to bleed out, even after everything he'd done, felt wrong. Her father had taught her to be hard when she needed to be, but never cruel. There was a difference between killing in self-defense and letting a man die slowly when you could prevent it. They got Pike on the black stallion, his hands tied to the saddle horn with rope from Clara's saddlebag. He slumped forward, barely conscious, but alive. Clara remounted the exhausted roan, pulling Colt up behind her one more time, and they made their way toward Fort Creek at a slow walk. There was no hurry now. Whatever waited for them in town would still be there, whether they rushed or took their time. As they entered the main street, people stopped what they were doing to stare. A small crowd began to gather, drawn by the spectacle of 3 blood-soaked riders, one of them clearly a prisoner. Clara heard whispers, speculation, saw fingers pointing. Someone ran ahead, probably to fetch the sheriff, and Clara's hand tightened on the rifle across her lap. This was it, the moment of truth. Sheriff Thomas Brennan emerged from his office as they reached it, a tall man with steel-gray hair and a weathered face that had seen too many hard years. His eyes took in the scene, Clara and Colt battered and bleeding, Pike tied to the horse and wounded, and his expression gave away nothing. Clara Weston, he said slowly. Didn't expect to see you in town today, or ever again from the looks of things. What happened? Clara dismounted carefully, helping Colt down, and faced the sheriff squarely. This was the moment. Everything depended on what she said next, how she said it, and how Brennan reacted. Sheriff, she began, her voice steady despite her pounding heart. My name is Clara Weston, and this is Colt Mercer. 3 days ago, Mr. Mercer witnessed the murder of Bill Hendricks in Laramie by Travis Blackwell and his gang. They pursued him to my cabin, where they attempted to kill us both. We defended ourselves, and in the process, we wounded several members of the gang, including Travis Blackwell himself. This man, she gestured to Pike, followed us here and ambushed us outside town. We've brought him to you to face charges of attempted murder, and we're prepared to testify about everything we've seen. The crowd had grown larger, murmuring at her words. Clara saw shock on some faces, skepticism on others, but it was Brennan's face she watched, searching for any sign of guilt, any hint that Pike had been telling the truth about corruption. Brennan was quiet for a long moment, his eyes moving from Clara to Colt to Pike and back again. Then he said, That's quite a story, Miss Weston. You have any proof to back it up? The bullet hole in Mr. Mercer's side, Clara said evenly. The marks on my throat where Blackwell tried to strangle me. The wounds on this prisoner. And if you send men back to my cabin, what's left of it, you'll find Travis Blackwell himself, along with at least one other gang member, both wounded and tied up. I left them there because we couldn't manage prisoners and survive the ride here. Your cabin burned? Brennan asked, and Clara thought she heard genuine concern in his voice. We burned it ourselves, she admitted, to create a diversion during the fight. It saved our lives, but she stopped, not trusting her voice to remain steady. The loss was still too fresh, too raw. Brennan stepped closer, studying Clara's face, then Colt's. Whatever he saw there seemed to satisfy him, because he nodded slowly and said, Get these people to Doc Morrison. Then I want full statements from both of them. And somebody get this prisoner secured in a cell before he bleeds all over my street. Relief flooded through Clara so intensely she almost collapsed. Brennan believed them. He was helping them. Pike had been lying, or wrong, or, oh, and Miss Weston? Brennan said as his deputies moved to help. I'm glad you made it out alive. Your father would be proud of how you handled yourself. Clara felt tears prick her eyes, but blinked them away. Thank you, Sheriff. Don't thank me yet. We've got a lot of work ahead of us if we're going to bring down Travis Blackwell and his gang for good, but we'll talk about that after Doc Morrison patches you two up. Now go on before you both fall over. Doc Morrison's office was small but clean, smelling of carbolic acid and medicinal herbs. The doctor himself was a round man in his 50s with gentle hands and a no-nonsense manner that reminded Clara of her father. He took one look at Colt and Clara and immediately ordered them both to separate examination tables. You first, he said to Colt, already cutting away the blood-soaked bandages. Let's see what kind of mess you've made of yourself. Miss Weston, you sit tight. I'll get to you next. Clara wanted to protest that her injury was minor, just a graze, but the room was spinning slightly and her legs felt like water. She sat down heavily on the second table and let exhaustion wash over her. They'd made it. Against all odds, through gunfire and betrayal and a desperate ride across hostile country, they'd made it to safety. Or at least to something resembling safety. Pike's words still echoed in her mind, even though Brennan's actions had seemed to disprove them. Could the sheriff really be trusted? Or was he playing a longer game, waiting to see what they knew before deciding whether to help them or bury them? Miss Weston. Clara looked up to find Doc Morrison standing before her, having finished his initial examination of Colt. Your friend is going to live, he said. The wound is infected, but I've seen worse. I'll clean it out, dose him with some medicine I got from a Cheyenne healer, works better than anything from the East, and keep him here for a few days to rest. But he's tough. He'll pull through. Thank God, Clara breathed. Now let's look at you. Morrison examined her shoulder where Pike's bullet had grazed her, cleaned the wound with practiced efficiency, and applied a bandage. You're lucky. Another inch to the right, and it would have hit the bone. As it is, you'll have a scar, but you'll have full use of your arm. I can live with a scar. Morrison studied her face, his expression thoughtful. You look exhausted, Miss Weston. When's the last time you slept? Really slept? Clara tried to remember and couldn't. Was it the night before last, before Colt had arrived at her cabin? That felt like a lifetime ago. I don't know, she admitted. Well, you need rest. Real rest. Not just closing your eyes for a few minutes between crises. I'm going to set you up in the room next to your friends, and I want you to sleep. Don't argue with me, he added when Clara opened her mouth to protest. You've been through hell, and your body needs time to recover. Everything else can wait until morning. But the sheriff wants statements. Can wait until morning, Morrison repeated firmly. I've already sent word to Tom Brennan. He understands. Now come on before you fall over right here in my office. The room Morrison led her to was small but comfortable, with a real bed and clean sheets and a window that looked out onto the main street. Clara sat on the edge of the bed, meaning to take off her boots, but the moment she bent forward, the exhaustion hit her like a physical blow. Her hands fumbled uselessly at the laces. Here, let me help. Clara looked up, startled, to find Colt standing in the doorway. He was wearing a clean shirt that Morrison must have loaned him, and his wound had been properly dressed, but he looked pale and unsteady on his feet. You should be in bed, Clara said. So should you. But I wanted to check on you first. He crossed the room carefully and knelt before her, gently pushing her hands aside and working at her bootlaces himself. Make sure you were all right. I'm fine, Clara said automatically, then laughed without humor. No, that's a lie. I'm exhausted and scared, and I just lost everything I owned. But I'm alive, which is more than I had any right to expect this morning. We're alive, Colt corrected softly. He got her boots off and stood, swaying slightly. Because we fought for each other, because we refused to give up. He held out his hand to her. Thank you, Clara, for everything, for saving my life, for standing with me, for being the strongest, bravest person I've ever met. Clara took his hand, feeling the calluses on his palm, the slight tremor in his fingers from blood loss and exhaustion. I'm not brave, she said. I was terrified the entire time. Being brave doesn't mean you're not scared, Colt said. It means you do what needs doing anyway. And you did. You saved us both. They stood there for a moment, hands clasped, looking at each other with an understanding that went beyond words. Something had formed between them in the crucible of violence and survival. Something neither of them was quite ready to name, but both could feel. A bond, forged in blood and fire, that might become something more if they let it. "Get some rest," Colt said finally, releasing her hand with obvious reluctance. "Tomorrow, we deal with Brennan and the law and whatever comes next. But tonight, we rest. Together, even if we're in separate rooms. All right?" "All right," Claire agreed. "Together." Colt left, closing the door softly behind him, and Clara finally let herself lie down on the bed. The sheets were soft, the mattress firm, and for the first time in days she felt truly safe. Not because she was in a locked room or in a town with a sheriff, but because Colt Mercer was in the next room, standing guard in his own way, refusing to let her face this alone. She was asleep before she could finish the thought. Clara woke to golden afternoon light streaming through the window and the smell of food cooking somewhere nearby. For a confused moment, she didn't know where she was, reaching instinctively for the rifle that should have been beside her bed. Then memory returned. The ride, the fight, Fork Creek, Doc Morrison's office, and she relaxed slightly. She was safe. They were safe. For now. She rose stiffly, her body protesting every movement, and found a basin of water and clean towels on the washstand. Someone, probably Morrison's wife, had also left clean clothes, a simple dress and underthings that were slightly too large but infinitely better than her blood-stained, smoke-damaged outfit. Clara washed as best she could and changed, feeling almost human for the first time in days. A knock at the door made her tense, but it was just Morrison, carrying a tray of food. "Thought you might be hungry," he said, setting it on the small table by the window. "Stew and bread, nothing fancy, but it'll put strength back in you." "Thank you," Clara said, and meant it. The food smelled wonderful, and her stomach reminded her forcefully that she hadn't eaten a real meal since before Colt had arrived at her cabin. She dug in gratefully while Morrison checked her bandage and pronounced himself satisfied with her progress. "Your friend's awake too," Morrison said, "and Sheriff Brennan's waiting downstairs to take your statements. You feel up to it?" Clara wanted to say no, wanted to stay in this safe little room and pretend the world outside didn't exist for just a little while longer. But that wasn't an option, wasn't who she was. Her father hadn't raised her to hide from hard things. "I'm ready," she said, finishing the stew and standing. "Let's get this done." Brennan was waiting in Morrison's front room, along with a young man Clara didn't recognize, who introduced himself as Deputy Hayes. They'd set up a makeshift interview space with chairs arranged around Morrison's desk, and both Clara and Colt, looking marginally better after rest and food, were seated side by side. "All right," Brennan said, pulling out a notebook and pencil. "Let's start from the beginning. Mr. Mercer, you witnessed a murder in Laramie 3 days ago. Tell me everything." Colt told his story clearly and concisely, describing Bill Hendricks's murder, Travis Blackwell's cold acknowledgement of having a witness, and the desperate flight that had ended at Clara's cabin. Brennan took notes, occasionally asking for clarification or more detail, his face giving away nothing of what he thought. Then it was Clara's turn. She described finding Colt bleeding on her doorstep, the surgery to remove the bullet, the arrival of the Blackwell gang, and the fight that had followed. She didn't embellish or dramatize, just laid out the facts as they'd happened. When she got to the part about burning her own cabin, she saw surprise flicker across Brennan's face. "That took guts," he said quietly. "Not many people would sacrifice their home like that." "Didn't have much choice," Clara said. "It was the cabin or our lives. I chose lives." Brennan nodded and made a note. "And after the fight, you rode here with a prisoner?" "Pike followed us," Clara said. "Ambushed us outside town. We wounded him and brought him in." "Pike's singing like a bird," Deputy Hayes interjected. "Soon as Doc Morrison patched him up and we got him in a cell, he started talking, trying to cut a deal, says he'll testify against Blackwell in exchange for leniency." "Will you give it to him?" Colt asked. "Depends on what he tells us and whether it checks out," Brennan said. "But the fact that he's willing to talk tells me he thinks Blackwell's finished. That's good for us." "Sheriff," Clara said carefully, "Pike told us something before we brought him in. He said you were working for Blackwell, that you'd been taking bribes, looking the other way. Is that true?" The room went very quiet. Deputy Hayes's hand moved subtly closer to his gun, and Clara tensed, ready to fight if this turned bad. But Brennan just looked at her with sad, tired eyes and said, "No, it's not true, but I understand why Pike would say it, and why you'd believe him." "Then why hasn't Blackwell been arrested?" Colt demanded. "If you're not protecting him, why is he operating freely across 3 territories?" "Because I had no proof," Brennan said flatly. "No witnesses willing to testify. No evidence that would hold up in court. Every time we got close to building a case, witnesses would disappear or recant their statements. People were terrified of Blackwell, and rightfully so. He killed anyone who stood against him, and he made sure everyone knew it." "But you have witnesses now," Clara said. "You have us." "Yes," Brennan agreed. "I do. And that changes everything. With your testimony, with Pike willing to talk, with the physical evidence of the fight at your cabin, I can finally build a case that will stick. We can bring Blackwell to trial, and we can hang him for his crimes." "Assuming he's still alive," Colt pointed out. "Clara left him wounded pretty badly. He could have bled out by now." "I sent men to your cabin this morning," Brennan said to Clara. "They should be back any time now. If Blackwell's there, they'll bring him in. If he's dead," he shrugged, "then justice was served a different way. Either outcome works for me." As if summoned by his words, the sound of horses and shouting came from outside. Brennan stood quickly and moved to the window, and Clara and Colt followed. A group of riders was approaching, and between them, slumped in a saddle and tied securely, was Travis Blackwell himself. He was alive. "Well," Brennan said with grim satisfaction, "looks like we're going to get our trial after all." They watched from the window as Blackwell was hauled off his horse and half-dragged into the sheriff's office across the street. Even wounded and captured, there was something menacing about him, something that made people step back and give him room. His eyes swept the street, taking in the crowd that had gathered, and for just a moment they locked with Clara's through the window. The hatred in that gaze was palpable, a physical force that made her take an involuntary step backward. Blackwell's lips moved, and though Clara couldn't hear the words, she could read them clearly enough. "This isn't over." Then he was inside, and the moment passed, but Clara felt cold despite the warm afternoon. Blackwell was captured, wounded, facing murder charges. But somehow she knew he was right. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. "Don't worry about him," Brennan said, noticing her expression. "He's going nowhere except a cell and then a courtroom. We've got him, Miss Weston. It's done." But Clara wasn't so sure. Men like Travis Blackwell didn't go down easy, didn't accept defeat gracefully. He'd have friends, allies, people who owed him favors or feared his revenge. And even locked in a cell, even facing the gallows, he'd be dangerous. "I want to see him," Clara said suddenly. "I want to look him in the eye and let him know he didn't win." "Clara," Colt started, but she cut him off. "I need to do this. I need to face him, not as a victim, not as someone running scared, but as the woman who fought him and survived, please." Brennan studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "All right. But Mr. Mercer comes with you, and so do I. I'm not letting you anywhere near Blackwell without protection, even behind bars." They crossed the street together, the 3 of them, while the townspeople whispered and pointed. Inside the sheriff's office, 2 deputies stood guard outside the cells, their rifles at the ready. And in the furthest cell, sitting on a narrow cot with his wounds freshly bandaged, was Travis Blackwell. He looked up as they entered, and a slow, cold smile spread across his scarred face. "Well, well, the happy couple. Come to gloat?" "Come to make sure you understand something," Clara said, stepping close to the bars but not quite within reach. "You tried to kill us. You burned my home. You murdered Colt's friend and who knows how many others. And you failed. We beat you. 2 people with no army, no gang, no hired guns, just us, and we beat you." "For now," Blackwell said softly. "But this ain't over, sweetheart. I've got friends in high places, lawyers who'll get me out of this, and when I do get out, and I will get out, I'm coming for you, both of you. I'm going to make you wish you died in that cabin fire." "You're not getting out," Colt said, his voice hard. "You're going to hang for what you did to Bill Hendricks, for all the people you've killed, and we're going to be there to watch it happen." "Big talk from a man who can barely stand," Blackwell sneered. "You think you're tough because you got lucky? Because some woman had to save your worthless hide? You're pathetic. Both of you are. And when my boys come for you, because they will come, you're going to die screaming." Clara felt Colt tense beside her, felt his hand move toward the gun at his hip, but she caught his arm. "He's trying to get to us," she said quietly. "Don't let him. He's beaten, and he knows it. This is all he has left, empty threats and poisoned words." She turned back to Blackwell, and when she spoke, her voice was calm and clear. "You're right about one thing. This isn't over. But not in the way you think. It's not over because we're going to make sure everyone knows what you did. We're going to testify in open court, and we're going to see you convicted. And then we're going to watch you hang, and we're going to go on with our lives while you rot in an unmarked grave. That's how this ends, Blackwell. Not with your victory, with ours." For just a moment, something flickered behind Blackwell's eyes. Fear, maybe, or recognition that he'd finally met people who wouldn't be intimidated, who wouldn't break no matter what he threatened. Then the mask was back, the cold smile, the arrogant confidence. But Clara had seen it. They all had. "We're done here," Brennan said, gesturing toward the door. "Clara, Colt, let's go. Blackwell's not worth any more of your time." They left him there, alone in his cell with his wounds and his rage, and stepped back out into the afternoon sunlight. Clara took a deep breath, feeling like she'd purged something dark and poisonous from her soul. She'd faced her demon and hadn't flinched. Whatever came next, she could handle it. "That was brave," Colt said quietly as they walked back toward Morrison's office. "And possibly crazy, but mostly brave." "I needed him to know," Clara said. "Needed to look him in the eye and show him he hadn't broken me, hadn't even bent me." "Oh, I don't think there's any question about that," Colt said with a slight smile. "Travis Blackwell knows exactly what kind of woman you are now. I almost feel sorry for him." "Almost?" "Almost." They walked in companionable silence for a moment, and then Colt said, "So what happens now? After the trial? After all this is settled?" Clara had been wondering the same thing. What did happen now? Her cabin was gone, her home destroyed. She had no money except what little she'd managed to grab before the fight, no possessions beyond the clothes on her back. She could rebuild, she supposed, try to start over on her father's land. But the thought of going back there alone, of facing those charred ruins and all the memories they contained, filled her with a weariness that went bone deep. "I don't know," she admitted. "I haven't thought that far ahead, been too busy trying to survive to worry about the future." "I've been thinking about it," Colt said, "and I have a proposition for you if you're interested in hearing it." "I'm listening." Bill Hendricks owned 160 acres about 20 miles from here. Good land with water rights and timber and everything you need to start a ranch. When he died, he left it to me in his will. We'd made arrangements like that in case anything happened to either of us. I'm the legal owner now. "That's good," Claire said, wondering where this was going. "The thing is," Colt continued, "I can't work it alone. Not with this wound, not for a while anyway. And even after I heal, it's too much land for one person. I need a partner, someone tough enough to handle frontier life, someone who knows how to survive, someone I can trust with my life." Clara stopped walking and turned to face him, her heart suddenly beating faster. "Are you asking what I think you're asking?" "I'm asking if you'd consider partnering with me," Colt said. 50-50 split, equal say, in all decisions. We build a ranch together, work it together. It wouldn't be easy, and Lord knows we'd have our hands full getting started. But I think we could do it. I think we'd make a good team." "We would," Clara said slowly, letting herself imagine it. A new cabin, new land, a fresh start with someone who understood what she'd been through and didn't try to protect her from the hard parts of life. "But Colt, I need you to be straight with me. Is this just a business arrangement? Or is there something more you're not saying?" Colt was quiet for a long moment, and Claire could see him choosing his words carefully. Finally, he said, "I don't know. Honest answer, I don't know. We've been through hell together, and that creates a bond. Whether that's just respect and friendship or something deeper, I can't say yet. But I'd like the chance to find out. If you would too." Clara thought about it, really thought about it. She'd spent 3 years alone, had convinced herself that she was content with solitude, that she didn't need anyone else. But these past few days with Colt had shown her something different, had shown her that having someone to rely on, someone who stood with you instead of trying to stand over you, wasn't weakness. It was strength. Strictly business to start, she said finally. Partners, equals, nothing assumed. But she paused, met his eyes, saw hope and uncertainty in equal measure. But I'm not opposed to seeing where things go, if we both want to. The smile that spread across Colt's face was worth every minute of fear and pain she'd endured. Partners it is, then, strictly business, until it's not. Until it's not, Clara agreed, and held out her hand to shake on it. But when Colt took her hand, he didn't shake it. Instead, he held it gently, his thumb tracing small circles on her palm, his eyes never leaving hers. The touch sent warmth spreading through Clara's chest, a feeling she hadn't experienced in so long she'd almost forgotten what it was like. Hope. It was hope. We should probably get back to Morrison's, Colt said after a moment, though he didn't release her hand. He'll wonder where we wandered off to. Probably, Clara agreed, also making no move to pull away. But Colt, thank you for the offer, for trusting me, for everything. Thank you, Colt said. For saving my life, for being stubborn enough not to give up, for being you. They stood there in the middle of Fort Creek's main street, hands clasped, smiling at each other like fools while the whole town watched and whispered. And Clara found that she didn't care what they thought or said. Let them talk. Let them speculate. She'd earned this moment of peace, this glimpse of a future that might include more than just survival. She'd earned the right to be happy. Come on, she said finally, gently pulling her hand free, before Brennan comes looking for us and thinks we've caused more trouble. Haven't we caused enough? Colt asked with a grin. I don't know, Clara said, matching his grin with one of her own. I kind of like causing trouble. Seems to suit me. Seems to suit both of us, Colt agreed. This partnership is going to be interesting. That's one word for it, Clara said. They walked back to Morrison's office together, side by side, two survivors facing an uncertain future with something neither had possessed just a few days ago, each other. The road ahead would be hard, Clara knew. There would be a trial, possibly danger from whatever remained of the Blackwell gang, and all the challenges of building a ranch from scratch. But for the first time since her father died, she wouldn't be facing those challenges alone. And that made all the difference. The trial was set for 3 weeks later, giving both Clara and Colt time to heal and Sheriff Brennan time to build an ironclad case. Those 3 weeks passed in a strange mixture of tension and tranquility, as if the world was holding its breath before the final confrontation. Doc Morrison insisted they both stay in Fort Creek under his care, and the townspeople, once they understood the full story, rallied around them with a generosity that left Clara nearly speechless. Mrs. Henderson at the general store provided clothes without asking for payment. The hotel owner, a gruff man named Samuel Carter, offered them rooms at no charge. Even the town's minister, Father Gregory, stopped by to offer prayers and support. Clara had spent 3 years alone, believing she needed no one, and now found herself surrounded by people who seemed determined to prove otherwise. Never seen anything like it, Colt said one evening as they sat on the porch of Morrison's office, watching the sun set over the mountains. His wound was healing well, the infection finally under control thanks to Morrison's mysterious Cheyenne medicine. An entire town coming together for 2 strangers. We're not strangers anymore, Clara pointed out. She'd gained weight back over the past weeks, her face losing that hollow, desperate look it had carried when they'd first ridden into town. The graze on her shoulder had healed to a pink scar that would fade with time. We're the people who stood up to Travis Blackwell and lived to tell about it. That means something to folks around here. Still feels strange being treated like heroes. All we did was survive. Sometimes that's heroic enough. Clara leaned back in her chair, letting the evening warmth wash over her. My father used to say that courage isn't about grand gestures. It's about doing what needs doing when everything in you wants to run. We did that. Both of us. Your father sounds like he was a wise man. He was, stubborn as a mule and twice as ornery, but wise. Clara smiled at the memory. He'd have liked you, I think. Would have respected the way you kept fighting even when you were half dead. That was his kind of strength. Colt was quiet for a moment, then said, I wish I could have met him. Could have asked his permission before proposing this partnership. He'd have given it, Clara said with certainty. He always told me to judge people by their actions, not their words. And your actions speak pretty clearly about who you are. What do they say? Clara turned to look at him, really look at him in the golden light of sunset. He'd filled out too over the past weeks, regaining strength, though he still moved carefully to avoid straining his healing wound. His face had lost that gray pallor of near death, replaced by healthy color that made his blue eyes stand out even more. He was handsome, she realized, in a rough, weathered way that spoke of hard living and harder choices. But more than that, he was good. Fundamentally, deeply good in a way that couldn't be faked or pretended. They say you're a man who keeps his promises, Clara said softly. A man who stands by his friends, even unto death. A man who sees women as equals rather than property or decoration. That's rare out here, Colt. Rare enough to be precious. He held her gaze, something warm and intense passing between them. Clara, Evening, folks. Sheriff Brennan's voice cut through the moment as he came up the porch steps, a folder of papers tucked under his arm. If he'd noticed the charged atmosphere, he was polite enough not to mention it. Hope I'm not interrupting. Not at all, Clara said, though part of her wanted to know what Colt had been about to say. What brings you by, Sheriff? Trial preparations, Brennan said, settling into the third chair with a weary sigh. Wanted to go over your testimonies one more time, make sure we've got everything straight. The circuit judge arrives tomorrow, and we'll start proceedings the day after. I want to be ready. What about Blackwell's lawyers? Colt asked. He said he had friends in high places. Are they going to be a problem? He's got one lawyer, Brennan said with a dismissive wave. Fellow named Thaddeus Marsh came up from Cheyenne. He's competent enough, but he's working with a bad hand. We've got eyewitness testimony, physical evidence, and Pike's confession. Plus Hawkins. Once he realized Blackwell had left him to die, he started talking too. Between the two of them, we've got enough to hang Blackwell 10 times over. What about Garrett? Clara asked. The one I shot at the barn. Did he survive? Brennan's expression grew somber. No. He died before my men got there. Your shot went through his lung. He probably didn't last more than a few minutes. He paused, watching Clara's face. You did what you had to do, Miss Weston. Don't carry guilt for it. Clara nodded, but the knowledge sat heavy in her chest nonetheless. She'd taken a life. Yes, it had been self-defense. Yes, the man had been trying to kill her, but that didn't make the weight of it any lighter. She'd lain awake several nights thinking about Garrett, wondering if he'd had a family somewhere, people who'd mourn him, wondering if there'd been any good in him before Blackwell's influence had twisted him toward evil. She'll carry it anyway, Colt said quietly, understanding in his voice. Because that's who she is. But she'll carry it and keep going. That's also who she is. Brennan looked between them and nodded slowly. You two have gotten close these past weeks. We've been through a lot together, Clara said carefully. That creates a bond. More than a bond, from what I see, Brennan said with a slight smile. But that's your business, not mine. What is my business is making sure you're both ready for what's coming. That courtroom is going to be packed. Every rancher, every miner, every townsperson within 50 miles is going to want to see Travis Blackwell face justice. And Blackwell himself. He's going to be sitting right there, staring at you while you testify. Can you handle that? I already faced him once, Clara said. In his cell. He tried to intimidate me, and it didn't work. The courtroom won't be any different. I can handle it, Colt added. I want to look him in the eye while I describe what he did to Bill. Want him to know that he didn't win, didn't break me, didn't silence the witness. Whatever he tries in that courtroom, I'm ready. Brennan studied them both, then nodded with satisfaction. Good. That's what I needed to hear. Now, let's go over the timeline one more time, make sure every detail matches up. They spent the next 2 hours reviewing their stories, with Brennan asking increasingly detailed questions, probing for any inconsistencies or weaknesses that Blackwell's lawyer might exploit. By the time they finished, Claire's head was pounding and exhaustion had settled deep in her bones. But she felt prepared. Whatever tomorrow brought, she'd be ready. Get some rest, Brennan said as he gathered his papers and stood to leave. Both of you. And Clara? Thank you. For everything you've done. Your father would be proud. After he left, Clara and Colt sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars emerge one by one in the darkening sky. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled, answered by another, their voices rising and falling in an ancient song. Clara found the sound comforting rather than eerie. This was the frontier, wild and dangerous and beautiful, and she'd survived it. They'd survived it together. "You scared?" Colt asked softly. "Terrified," Clara admitted. "But I'm going to do it anyway. What about you?" "Same. Though I'm more scared of what comes after the trial than the trial itself." "What do you mean?" Colt shifted in his chair, and Clara could sense his discomfort with what he was about to say. "The partnership we talked about. Are you sure about it?" "Really sure. Because once this trial is over, once Blackwell is convicted and we start building that ranch, there's no easy way back. We'll be committed to each other, to the land, to the life we're building. And I need to know you're not just agreeing because you feel obligated or because you lost your home and don't have anywhere else to go." Clara was quiet for a long moment, turning the question over in her mind. Was she sure? 3 weeks ago, standing in the street after facing Blackwell in his cell, the partnership had seemed like a lifeline, a way to avoid facing the ruins of her old life alone. But now, after spending time with Colt, learning his habits and his humor, watching the way he treated everyone from Doc Morrison to the hotel owner's daughter with equal respect, she knew it was more than that. "I'm sure," she said finally. "Not because I don't have options. Brennan told me yesterday that the town council would help me rebuild my cabin if I wanted to go back, and Mrs. Henderson offered me a job at the general store if I preferred to stay in Fort Creek. I have choices, Colt, and I'm choosing you. Choosing us. Because I think we could build something good together, something that lasts." "Something more than just a ranch," Colt said, and it wasn't quite a question. "Maybe," Clara allowed, "if that's something you'd want. But we don't have to decide that now. We can start with this partnership, see how it goes, and let the rest develop naturally. No pressure, no expectations, just two people working together and seeing where it leads." "I'd like that," Colt said, and the relief in his voice was palpable. "I'd like that a lot. Because, Clara, I need you to know, these past weeks, getting to know you, seeing how strong you are and how kind, despite everything you've been through, it's made me realize that you're remarkable, and I'd be a fool not to see where this could go." Clara felt warmth bloom in her chest, spreading outward until her whole body felt light and floating. "You're not so bad yourself, Cowboy," she said, trying to keep her tone light, even though her heart was hammering. "For someone who showed up at my door more dead than alive. Best decision I ever made, getting shot and finding your cabin. Worst decision you ever made, getting shot at all." "Fair point," Colt conceded with a laugh. Then more seriously, "Thank you, Clara, for giving this a chance, for giving us a chance." "Thank you for asking," Clara said, "for seeing me as a partner instead of someone who needs protecting or managing. That means more than you know." They sat together as full darkness fell, and Clara felt something settle in her soul, a sense of rightness that had been missing since her father died. She wasn't alone anymore. She had a partner, maybe more than a partner if they were lucky. She had a future that looked different from what she'd imagined, but no less full of possibility. Whatever tomorrow brought, whatever challenges lay ahead, they'd face them together. The courthouse was packed when they arrived the next morning, every seat filled and people standing 3 deep along the walls. Clara wore the best dress Mrs. Henderson had been able to provide, a simple blue cotton that fit reasonably well, and had pinned her hair up in what she hoped was a respectable style. Beside her, Colt looked uncomfortable in borrowed formal clothes, tugging at his collar every few minutes. "Stop fidgeting," Clara whispered as they took their seats at the front. "You look fine." "I look like a schoolboy at his first dance," Colt muttered. "How do men wear these things every day?" "Practice," Clara said, but she took his hand and squeezed it reassuringly. His fingers closed around hers, warm and strong, and she felt some of her own nervousness ease. They were in this together. They could handle it together. The crowd went silent as Travis Blackwell was led into the courtroom. He moved slowly, his chains rattling with each step, but his head was high and his expression contemptuous. His wounds had healed somewhat, though he still moved stiffly, and his eyes swept the room like a predator assessing prey. When his gaze found Clara and Colt, he smiled, a cold, humorless expression that promised violence and vengeance. Clara lifted her chin and stared back, refusing to look away, refusing to give him the satisfaction of seeing fear. After a moment, Blackwell's smile faded, and he was the one who looked away first. A small victory, but Clara took it. The judge entered, a stern-looking man in his 60s named Hiram Walsh, and court was called to order. The charges were read. Murder in the first degree for the killing of Bill Hendricks, attempted murder for the attack on Clara and Colt, arson, assault, and a list of other crimes stretching back years based on Pike and Hawkins's testimonies. Blackwell's lawyer, Thaddeus Marsh, entered a plea of not guilty, and the trial began. Sheriff Brennan was the first witness, describing the evidence his deputies had found at Clara's burned cabin: spent shell casings, blood trails, the bodies of horses shot during the fight. He presented the weapons they'd confiscated from Blackwell and his men, including the rifle Pike had used in his final ambush. His testimony was dry, factual, and damning. Then it was Colt's turn. Clara watched as he walked to the witness stand, took the oath, and settled into the chair. He looked nervous but determined, and when the prosecutor asked him to describe what he'd witnessed in Laramie, his voice was steady and clear. "Bill Hendricks was my partner and my friend," Colt began. "We were in Laramie to finalize the purchase of land up near Fort Creek. Bill had been approached by Travis Blackwell several times about selling a claim he owned, and he'd refused each time. Blackwell didn't like being refused." "Objection," Marsh said lazily. "Speculation about Mr. Blackwell's state of mind." "Sustained," Judge Walsh said. "Stick to what you observed, Mr. Mercer." Colt nodded. "I was in the saloon when I saw Bill step outside. Blackwell and two of his men were waiting. They had words, I couldn't hear what was said through the window, and then Blackwell drew his gun and shot Bill 3 times in the back. Bill fell, and Blackwell stood over him, and then he looked up and saw me watching. He said, 'We got a witness,' and I ran." "You're certain it was Travis Blackwell who fired the shots?" "Absolutely certain. I got a clear look at him. That scar on his face, you can't mistake it. And his voice when he spoke, I'll hear that in my nightmares for the rest of my life." "What happened next?" Colt described the chase, the desperate flight across Wyoming, the bullet that had brought him down. His voice wavered slightly when he described arriving at Clara's cabin, barely conscious, expecting to die. Clara felt tears prick her eyes as she listened, remembering that moment, the weight of him as she'd caught him, the blood that had seemed like it would never stop. "And Miss Weston helped you despite the danger to herself," the prosecutor said. "She saved my life," Colt said simply. "Dug the bullet out, fought off Blackwell's gang when they came looking for me, and then rode with me to Fort Creek to make sure I survived to testify. Without her, I'd be dead, and Blackwell would have gotten away with murder." The prosecutor nodded, satisfied, and yielded to Marsh for cross-examination. Blackwell's lawyer stood, straightening his jacket, and approached the witness stand with a predatory smile. "Mr. Mercer, you admit you'd been drinking at the saloon before this alleged incident?" "I'd had 1 beer. I wasn't drunk." "But your judgment might have been impaired. In dim light, through a window, from a distance, could you have mistaken someone else for my client?" "No, I know what I saw." "You know what you think you saw," Marsh corrected. "But you also admit you were friends with Mr. Hendricks. Close friends. Perhaps close enough that when he was killed, you wanted someone to blame. And my client, who has an admittedly troubled past, made an easy target?" "Objection!" The prosecutor shot to his feet. "Counsel is badgering the witness." "I'm testing the reliability of his testimony," Marsh said smoothly. "The witness's emotional state is relevant." "I'll allow it," Judge Walsh said. "But tread carefully, Mr. Marsh." Marsh turned back to Colt. "Isn't it true that you and Mr. Hendricks had financial troubles? That you were both nearly destitute when you came to Wyoming?" "We'd had setbacks, yes, but that doesn't change what I saw." "Doesn't it? A desperate man might see opportunities where they don't exist, might fabricate a story to gain sympathy, perhaps even financial support from the community." "That's a lie," Colt said, his voice going hard. "I'm not here for money or sympathy. I'm here because Travis Blackwell murdered my friend in cold blood, and I'm going to see him hang for it." "You see, Your Honor," Marsh said, turning to the judge, "the witness admits to a personal vendetta against my client. How can we trust his testimony when he's clearly biased?" But the judge was shaking his head. "I've heard enough, Mr. Marsh. The witness has been consistent in his account, and there's physical evidence to support his claims. Move on or sit down." Marsh tried a few more angles, but Colt refused to be shaken. When he finally stepped down from the witness stand and returned to his seat beside Clara, she took his hand again and whispered, "You did good, really good." "Your turn next," Colt said, and Clara felt her stomach clench with anxiety. Her name was called, and she walked to the witness stand on legs that felt like water. The oath was administered, and suddenly she was sitting there with the entire town staring at her, waiting to hear her story. She found Colt's face in the crowd and focused on him, using him as an anchor. The prosecutor was gentle, walking her through the events of that night when Colt had arrived at her cabin. Clara described the surgery, the arrival of Blackwell's gang, the fight that had followed. Her voice was steady as she recounted shooting Hawkins, wounding Pike, watching Colt kill Garrett to save her life. But when she got to the part where Blackwell had grabbed her, had tried to strangle her, her voice wavered. "Take your time, Miss Weston," the prosecutor said kindly. Clara nodded and continued. She described the knife she'd driven into Blackwell's leg, Colt's shot that had finally brought the gang leader down. She described burning her own cabin, the desperate ride to Fork Creek, Pike's final ambush. By the time she finished, several women in the audience were crying openly, and even some of the men looked affected. "Thank you, Miss Weston," the prosecutor said. "Your witness, Mr. Marsh." Marsh approached, and Clara braced herself. She knew he'd try to tear her story apart, to make her seem unreliable or hysterical, or any of the other things men said about women who fought back. "Miss Weston, you lived alone for 3 years in a remote cabin. Is that correct?" "Yes." "That's unusual for a woman. Some might even say unnatural. Did you not have family who could have taken you in, friends in town?" "My father was my family. The cabin was my home. I had no reason to leave." "But living alone like that, without the civilizing influence of society, might it have affected your judgment? Made you paranoid, perhaps? Seeing threats where none existed?" "I wasn't paranoid," Clara said coldly. "I was cautious. There's a difference. And the threats were very real, as evidenced by the bullet wounds Mr. Mercer and I both carry. Wounds that could have come from any number of sources. You admit you shot first when my client and his associates approached your cabin. Isn't it possible they were simply travelers seeking shelter, and you attacked them without provocation?" "They came to kill Colt. They said as much. And when I wounded one of them, instead of surrendering, they tried to burn my cabin with us inside. Those aren't the actions of innocent travelers." Marsh tried several more approaches, suggesting she was emotionally unstable, that her testimony was tainted by her relationship with Colt, that she'd shot Garrett in cold blood rather than self-defense. But Clara met each attack with calm, reasoned responses, refusing to be rattled. She'd faced down Travis Blackwell with a rifle in her hands. She could certainly handle a lawyer with nothing but words. When she finally stepped down, Clara felt drained but victorious. She'd told her truth, and from the expressions on the jurors' faces, they'd believed her. The rest of the trial passed quickly. Pike testified, describing years of crimes committed under Blackwell's orders, his voice shaking as he admitted his own role in murders, robberies, and worse. Hawkins corroborated Pike's testimony from a stretcher, still too injured to walk. Doc Morrison testified about the severity of Clara and Colt's wounds, confirming they'd been fighting for their lives. Even some of Blackwell's former associates came forward, people he'd wronged over the years who finally felt safe enough to speak. Through it all, Blackwell sat silent, his face a mask of contempt, occasionally whispering to his lawyer but never taking the stand himself. Marsh made impassioned closing arguments about reasonable doubt and circumstantial evidence, but everyone in that courtroom knew the truth. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. When they filed back in, Clara felt Colt's hand find hers again, holding tight. Judge Walsh asked for the verdict, and the jury foreman, a weathered rancher named Tom Wilson, stood and said in a clear, caring voice, "We find the defendant, Travis Blackwell, guilty on all counts." The courtroom erupted in cheers and applause. Clara felt tears streaming down her face, relief and vindication and grief all mixed together. Beside her, Colt was also crying, mourning his friend but knowing Bill's death had finally been avenged. They held each other while Judge Walsh banged his gavel for order, while Blackwell was led away shouting threats and curses, while the townspeople celebrated a victory years in the making. Sentencing will be tomorrow, Judge Walsh announced once order was restored. But given the severity of the crimes and the overwhelming evidence, I can tell you now that Mr. Blackwell will hang. Court is adjourned. Clara and Colt left the courthouse together, stepping out into bright sunshine that seemed too cheerful for such a dark day. They'd won. They'd faced down evil and survived and seen justice served. But Clara felt hollow, exhausted in a way that went beyond physical tiredness. "It's over," Colt said softly. "It's really over." "The trial is," Clara agreed. "But the rest, the healing, the rebuilding, making something good come out of all this darkness, that's just beginning." "Then we start tomorrow," Colt said. "Tonight, we rest. We let ourselves feel everything we've been holding back these past weeks. And tomorrow, we start building our future." Clara nodded, leaning into him, letting him support her weight. Tomorrow, they'd go to Bill Hendrick's land, would start planning the ranch they'd build together. Tomorrow, they'd begin turning tragedy into triumph, would honor the dead by living well. Tomorrow was for hope and new beginnings. But tonight, Clara let herself grieve. For her father, for her cabin, for the innocence she'd lost and could never reclaim. For Bill Hendricks, who'd never see the ranch he'd died trying to create. For Garrett, twisted by Blackwell into something monstrous but maybe redeemable if he'd lived. For all the victims of violence and cruelty who'd never gotten justice. She cried in Colt's arms while the sun set, and he held her and cried too, and somehow that shared grief became the foundation of something stronger than either of them had been alone. Sentencing the next day was brief. Judge Walsh sentenced Blackwell to hang, with the execution set for 1 week hence. Clara attended, wanting to see it through to the end, but when the day came, she found she couldn't watch. She and Colt waited in the hotel while a crowd gathered at the gallows, and when someone came to tell them it was done, Clara felt nothing. No triumph, no satisfaction, just an empty sadness for all the lives Blackwell had destroyed, including his own. "Let's go," she said to Colt. "Let's leave this place and never look back. I want to see our land. I want to start building something good." They rode out that afternoon, just the two of them on horses Sheriff Brennan had helped them purchase. The ride to Bill Hendrick's property took 4 hours, winding through pine forests and across clear streams, gradually climbing into hills that offered stunning views of the valley below. And when they finally reached the land that was now theirs, Clara caught her breath. It was beautiful. A wide meadow suitable for grazing, bordered by timber perfect for building. A creek running year-round, clear and cold. Mountains rising in the distance, snow-capped and majestic. Room enough for a cabin, a barn, corrals, and fields. Everything they needed to start fresh, to build a life. "What do you think?" Colt asked, watching her face. "I think it's perfect," Clara said honestly. "I think we could be happy here." "I think so too." Colt dismounted and helped her down, and they stood together, looking at their future. "Where should we build the cabin? Near the creek or up on that rise?" "The rise," Clara decided. "Better view, and less risk of flooding. We can dig a well for water." "Agreed." "And the barn?" They spent the next hour walking the property, planning and dreaming, their excitement building with each decision. By the time the sun began to set, they'd marked out locations for every building, had mapped where they'd plant crops, and where they'd let cattle graze. It was ambitious, maybe too ambitious for two people still recovering from injuries, but it was theirs, and that made all the difference. "We should get back to town," Colt said reluctantly as darkness approached. "But we'll come back tomorrow and start clearing ground for the cabin. If we work hard, we might have walls up before the first snow." "Then we'd better work hard," Clara said. She looked at Colt, this man who'd stumbled into her life bleeding and desperate, who'd fought beside her and trusted her and offered her a partnership that was becoming something more with each passing day. "Thank you," she said softly, "for all of this, for giving me a reason to keep going when I'd lost everything." "You gave me the same thing," Colt said. "We saved each other, Clara. And now we're going to build something together that honors everyone we've lost. A home, a ranch, a life worth living." He held out his hand, and Clara took it, feeling that now familiar warmth spread through her chest. They stood together as the stars emerged, two souls who'd survived hell and found each other on the other side. Tomorrow they'd start building. But tonight, They had this moment, this perfect moment of possibility and hope, and that was enough. The first log went up 3 days later, cut from pines they'd felled together on the north edge of their property. Clara had never built a cabin before, but she'd watched her father do it, had helped him repair and expand their old home countless times. The knowledge was there, buried in muscle memory and childhood observations, waiting to be used. Colt had experience from his Texas ranch, and together they figured out what they didn't know through trial and error and sheer stubborn determination. The work was backbreaking. They rose before dawn and worked until their hands bled and their muscles screamed, stopping only when darkness made it impossible to continue. Colt's wound still pained him, and Clara could see him favoring his side when he thought she wasn't looking. Her own shoulder ached in the cold mornings, the scar tissue tight and unforgiving. But neither complained. They'd survived worse than physical pain. They could survive this too. Sheriff Brennan rode out twice a week to check on them, bringing supplies from town and news of the world beyond their property. Pike and Hawkins had both been sentenced to 20 years hard labor, sent to the territorial prison in Laramie. The remainder of the Blackwell gang had scattered to the winds, leaderless and broken. A few had been caught and arrested. Most had simply disappeared, probably fled to Montana or Colorado to start over under new names. "You don't have to worry about revenge," Brennan told them one evening as they sat around the campfire, too tired to do anything but rest. "With Blackwell dead and his organization dismantled, nobody's coming after you. You're safe." "We were never really worried," Colt said, and Clara knew it was true. After everything they'd faced, the phantom threat of scattered gang members felt almost trivial. "We've got each other. That's all the protection we need." Brennan smiled at that, his weathered face crinkling. "You two are good together. Anyone can see it. When's the wedding?" Clara felt her cheeks flush. "We're partners, Sheriff. Business partners." "Sure you are," Brennan said with a knowing look. "And I'm the Queen of England. But take your time. No need to rush these things. Just make sure you invite me when you finally stop pretending." After he left, Clara and Colt sat in awkward silence for a while. Finally, Colt said, "He's not wrong, you know, about us being good together." "I know," Clara admitted. "I've been thinking the same thing." "So what are we waiting for?" Clara considered that, watching the fire dance and crackle. What were they waiting for? Some arbitrary period of time to pass? Some signal that it was appropriate to acknowledge what had been growing between them since the moment he'd saved her from Blackwell's chokehold? "I guess I'm scared," she said honestly. "My whole life I've relied only on myself. Needed only myself. Even with my father, I was always preparing for the day I'd be alone. And now you're here and you're becoming necessary to me in a way that's terrifying. Because what if something happens? What if I lose you too?" Colt moved closer, taking her hand. "You might," he said gently. "Life out here is hard and dangerous, and neither of us is guaranteed tomorrow. But Clara, isn't it better to have someone for whatever time we're given than to be alone out of fear? Isn't it better to take the risk? When did you get so wise?" "About the time a beautiful, stubborn woman saved my life and showed me what real courage looks like." He squeezed her hand. "I'm not asking you to marry me tomorrow. Hell, I'm not asking you to marry me at all if you don't want to, but I am asking you to stop pretending this is just a business arrangement, because it stopped being just business the moment we fought together, the moment we chose each other over safety." Clara looked at their joined hands, calloused and scarred, marked by hard work and harder living. Then she looked up at his face, at the honesty in his eyes, the vulnerability in letting her see how much he cared, and she made her choice. "You're right," she said softly. "It stopped being just business a long time ago. I just wasn't ready to admit it. And now? Now I'm ready." She moved closer, closing the distance between them. "I don't know what the future holds, Colt Mercer, but I know I want to face it with you, not just as a partner, but as whatever we become. If you'll have me." "If I'll have you?" Colt laughed, a sound of pure joy. "Clara, you're the strongest, bravest, most remarkable woman I've ever met. I'd be honored to build a life with you, in whatever way you want that to look." He leaned in slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted. But Clara didn't want to pull away. She met him halfway, and when their lips touched, it felt like coming home. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, both of them testing this new territory. Then it deepened, became more certain, more real. Clara felt something unlock in her chest, a door she'd kept barred opening to let warmth and light flood in. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Colt rested his forehead against hers. "So we're doing this?" he asked. "We're doing this," Clara confirmed, "whatever this becomes." "I think it becomes pretty much everything," Colt said, "if we let it." "Then let's let it," Clara said, and kissed him again. They sat by the fire for hours, talking and kissing and planning, finally acknowledging everything they'd been dancing around for weeks. By the time they banked the fire and retreated to their separate tents, they'd agreed to court properly for a few months, to give themselves time to be sure. But Clara already knew she was sure. She'd been sure since the moment Colt had dragged himself out of that cellar to save her life, wounded and barely able to stand but refusing to let her face danger alone. The cabin took shape over the following weeks, rising log by log from the Wyoming earth. They worked side by side, falling into an easy rhythm that made the labor almost pleasant. Clara would notch the logs while Colt positioned them. Then they'd lift together, their movements synchronized. They discovered they worked well as a team, each anticipating the other's needs, covering each other's weaknesses with their own strengths. Other ranchers from the area started stopping by, offering help and advice. The Henderson family from Fort Creek brought their 3 sons to help raise the roof beams. Tom Wilson, the jury foreman, arrived with his wagon full of supplies and refused payment. Even Father Gregory came out to bless the property and share a meal. The community that had rallied around them during the trial was still there, still supporting them, invested in their success. "Never seen people pull together like this," Colt marveled one evening after a particularly productive day where 7 neighbors had shown up unannounced to help. Back in Texas, folks kept to themselves more. But here we need each other to survive, Clara finished. The winters are harder, the land is less forgiving. You help your neighbors because someday you'll need their help. It's not charity, it's insurance. "Smart," Colt said. "And kind. I like it here, Clara. I think we made the right choice." "I know we did," Clara said, and meant it. This land, this community, this man, it all felt right in a way her old life never quite had. She'd been surviving before, existing day to day. Now she was living, building toward a future that excited rather than frightened her. The cabin was finished by mid-October, just as the first snow began to dust the mountain peaks. It was small but solid, one large room with a sleeping loft and a stone fireplace that drew well. Clara had sewn curtains from fabric Mrs. Henderson had donated, bright yellow cotton that made the space feel cheerful even on gray days. Colt had built furniture from leftover timber, a table, 2 chairs, a bed frame that sat waiting in the loft for a mattress they'd ordered from the catalog. They stood in the doorway on the day they moved in, looking at their handiwork with justified pride. "It's not much," Colt said, "but it's ours." "It's perfect," Clara corrected. "It's home." That night they christened the cabin with a dinner of venison stew and fresh bread, sitting at their new table in their new home, talking about plans for spring. They'd need to buy cattle, would need to build corrals and outbuildings. There was still so much work ahead, but they had the winter to plan, to rest, to let their bodies fully heal before the next phase began, and they had each other. "Clara," Colt said as they cleared the dishes, "I've been thinking." "Dangerous habit," she teased, but her smile faded when she saw how serious he looked. "What is it?" "We've been courting for 2 months now, and I know we said we'd take our time, make sure this was real. But Clara, I'm sure. I've been sure since that moment in Fort Creek when we agreed to partner up. Every day since has only made me more certain, so I'm asking, will you marry me?" Clara's heart stuttered in her chest. She'd known this was coming, had been expecting it even, but hearing the actual words still took her breath away. "Colt!" "I know it's fast," he continued quickly. "I know we've only known each other a few months, but we've been through more together than most couples experience in a lifetime. We've fought and bled and built together. We've seen each other at our worst and our best. And I love you, Clara. I love your strength and your stubbornness and the way you face down fear with your chin up and your rifle loaded. I love how you make me want to be better, braver, more than I ever thought I could be, and I want to spend the rest of my life with you, however long or short that might be." Clara felt tears streaming down her face, but she was smiling too, smiling so hard her cheeks hurt. "You love me?" "Desperately," Colt confirmed. "Completely. Forever, if you'll let me." "I love you too," Clara said, the words feeling both strange and perfect on her tongue. "I didn't think I could, didn't think I had room in my life for anyone else. But you proved me wrong. You showed me that being strong doesn't mean being alone. And yes, Colt Mercer. Yes, I'll marry you." Colt whooped with joy and swept her into his arms, spinning her around the small cabin while she laughed and cried simultaneously. When he set her down, he kissed her thoroughly, tenderly, like she was precious and fragile and strong all at once. "We should do it soon," Clara said when they finally came up for air. "Before winter really sets in. Father Gregory can perform the ceremony, and we can have the reception at the hotel in Fort Creek. Nothing fancy, just our friends and neighbors." "Nothing fancy sounds perfect," Colt agreed, "though I should probably get you a ring. Can't propose properly without a ring." "I don't need a ring," Clara said. "I just need you." But 2 days later, Colt presented her with a simple gold band that had belonged to his mother, saved from the Texas ranch before the bank took everything. "She'd want you to have it," he said as he slipped it onto Clara's finger. "She always said the woman who finally caught me would have to be something special." She was right. They were married 3 weeks later on a crisp November morning with half of Fort Creek in attendance. Clara wore a dress borrowed from Mrs. Henderson, cream-colored lace that had been her wedding dress 30 years prior. Colt wore his best suit, cleaned and pressed until it looked almost new. Sheriff Brennan gave Clara away, standing in for the father she'd lost. Doc Morrison served as best man, grinning like he'd orchestrated the whole thing himself. Father Gregory performed the ceremony in the small church, speaking of love and partnership and the courage it took to build a life together in an unforgiving land. When he asked if anyone objected, there was only supportive silence. And when Colt and Clara exchanged vows, promising to stand together through whatever storms came, to face the future as equals, to love and honor and never give up on each other, there wasn't a dry eye in the church. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," Father Gregory said with satisfaction. "You may kiss your bride." And Colt did, dipping Clara dramatically while the congregation cheered and applauded. When he set her upright again, both of them were grinning like fools, and Clara felt a happiness so complete it was almost painful. This man, this moment, this life they were building, it was everything she'd never known she wanted. The reception at the hotel was loud and joyful, with music and dancing and more food than they could possibly eat. People toasted the couple, sharing stories about Clara's courage and Colt's determination. Someone produced a fiddle, and dancing broke out in the street. Clara danced with Colt, with Sheriff Brennan, with Doc Morrison, with nearly every man in attendance. Her feet ached and her face hurt from smiling, but she didn't want it to end. As the sun set and the party began to wind down, Colt pulled Clara aside. "Ready to go home, Mrs. Mercer?" Clara tested the name, rolled it around in her mind. Mrs. Mercer, Clara Mercer. It felt right, felt like it had always been hers. "Ready," she said. "Let's go home." They rode back to their cabin under a sky full of stars, both of them quiet but content. When they arrived, Colt dismounted and helped Clara down, then surprised her by sweeping her into his arms. "Tradition," he explained at her startled look, carrying the bride over the threshold. "We crossed that threshold a dozen times already," Clara pointed out, but she wrapped her arms around his neck and let him carry her inside. He set her down gently in front of the fireplace, where someone, probably Doc Morrison, had laid a fire ready to light. Colt knelt and struck a match, and soon warmth and light filled the cabin. Their home, the beginning of their life together. "Scared?" Colt asked, echoing the question he'd asked before the trial. "Terrified," Clara admitted, echoing her response. "But I'm going to do it anyway." "Do what?" "This. Us. All of it. Be your wife, build this ranch, face whatever comes next. I'm terrified it's too good to be real, too perfect to last, but I'm going to believe in it anyway. Believe in us." Colt cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing away tears she hadn't realized were falling. "It's real, Clara. We're real. And we're going to last because we fight for each other, because we refuse to give up, because what we have is worth protecting. Worth protecting, Claire repeated. I like that. We protect each other. Always. Always, Colt agreed and kissed her. They made love that night for the first time, tender and awkward and beautiful, learning each other's bodies the way they'd learned each other's hearts. Clara had been nervous, uncertain what to expect, but Colt was gentle and patient, and by the time the fire burned low, she felt cherished and desired and more complete than she'd ever been alone. Afterward, they lay tangled together under quilts in the sleeping loft, watching shadows dance across the ceiling. Outside, wind whispered through the pines, and somewhere distant a wolf howled. But inside, they were warm and safe and together. Tell me about the future, Clara said drowsily. What do you see for us? Colt was quiet for a moment, thinking. Then he said, I see spring and us buying our first cattle. I see summers moving them to high pasture, working side by side like we've been doing. I see winters like this one, just the two of us, learning each other, building something that lasts. I see children, maybe, if we're blessed. A son with your stubbornness, a daughter with your courage. I see that too, Clara said. And I see us growing old together, sitting on a porch we haven't built yet, watching grandchildren play in a yard that's still just plans in our heads. I see us surviving and thriving and proving that love is stronger than violence, that building is better than destroying, that hope matters more than fear. I like your vision better than mine, Colt said. Can we have both? We can have whatever we work for, Clara said. That's what my father taught me. Nothing's guaranteed, but everything's possible if you're willing to fight for it. And I'm willing to fight for this. For us. So am I, Colt said. Until my last breath and beyond. I'm all in, Clara Mercer. Clara Mercer, she repeated softly, trying it out. I think I like being Clara Mercer. I know I like you being Clara Mercer, Colt said, kissing her forehead. Now sleep. We've got work tomorrow. The fence line needs mending before the snow gets serious. Clara smiled and closed her eyes, feeling safe and loved and home in a way she'd never expected to feel again. She'd lost so much. Her father, her cabin, her old life. But she'd gained something infinitely more valuable. A partner. A husband. A future full of possibility. And that was worth every moment of pain it had taken to get here. Winter settled over their land with a beauty that took Clara's breath away. Snow fell thick and soft, blanketing everything in white, muffling sounds and making the world feel intimate, private. They were snowed in for days at a time, but neither minded. They had each other, had food stored and wood cut and work enough to keep them busy. Colt taught Clara to play chess using pieces he'd carved from pine. Clara taught Colt to read better, working through the stack of books Father Gregory had loaned them. They cooked together, cleaned together, planned for spring together. And at night, they explored this new dimension of their relationship, learning to communicate without words, to give and receive pleasure, to be vulnerable with each other in ways that went beyond physical intimacy. I never thought I'd be this happy, Clara confessed one evening as they sat by the fire. Even before everything happened with Blackwell, before I lost the cabin, I thought I was content alone. But I didn't know what I was missing. Neither did I, Colt said. I thought happiness was having land, having security, having enough. But it's not. It's this. It's you. It's us. We got lucky, Clara said, finding each other the way we did. I wouldn't call getting shot and almost dying lucky, Colt said with a wry smile. But I take your point. The outcome was lucky, even if the circumstances were terrible. Bill Hendricks, Clara said softly. Your friend. He made this possible. His death, as horrible as it was, it brought you to me. Does that feel wrong to say? No, Colt said slowly. Bill would have liked you, I think, would have approved of what we're building here, and I like to think that something good coming from his death would have mattered to him, that his loss wasn't completely meaningless if it led to this. They were quiet for a while, honoring Bill's memory, acknowledging the cost of their happiness. Then Clara said, I want to do something for him. Maybe a marker on the property? Something to remember him by? I'd like that, Colt said, his voice thick with emotion. Thank you for thinking of it. They built the marker together when the weather cleared, a simple wooden cross with Bill's name carved carefully into the crossbeam. They placed it on a rise overlooking the meadow, with a view of the mountains beyond. Colt said a few words, and Clara added a prayer her father had taught her. It wasn't much, but it felt right. Bill Hendricks would be remembered here, on the land he'd died trying to reach. As winter slowly gave way to early spring, Clara began to suspect she might be pregnant. Her monthly courses had stopped, and she was sick most mornings, though she tried to hide it from Colt. When he finally noticed, his reaction was pure joy mixed with terror. "A baby?" he said, his hand trembling as he pressed it gently to her still flat stomach. "We're going to have a baby?" "I think so," Clara said. "I'm not certain yet, but all the signs are there. Are you happy about it?" "Happy," Colt laughed, a sound that was half sob. "Clara, I'm terrified and thrilled in equal measure. We're going to be parents. We're going to bring a child into this world and teach them and love them, and, oh God, what if I'm a terrible father?" "You won't be," Clara said with certainty. "You're going to be wonderful. You're kind and patient and strong. Everything a father should be." "What about you? Are you scared?" "Absolutely," Clara admitted. "My mother died giving birth to me. I know the risks, but I want this, Colt. I want to build a family with you, want to fill this cabin with children and love and laughter. So yes, I'm scared, but I'm also more excited than I've ever been." They held each other for a long time, both of them crying and laughing, overwhelmed by the enormity of what they were creating. Not just a ranch or a home, but a family, a legacy, something that would outlast them both. Doc Morrison confirmed the pregnancy in April, pronouncing Clara healthy and the baby strong. "Should arrive sometime in October," he said. "You'll need to take it easy as you get further along, but for now you're fine to continue normal activities. Just listen to your body." Clara intended to follow that advice, but there was too much work to do. Cattle to buy, fences to mend, crops to plant. She worked alongside Colt through her 4th and 5th months, only slowing down when the baby's movements became too distracting to ignore. By her 6th month, Colt had banned her from heavy labor entirely, insisting she rest and let him handle the work. "I'm pregnant, not dying," Clara protested. "And I want to keep it that way," Colt said firmly. "Both of you healthy and safe. So humor me, please. Let me take care of you for once." Clara grumbled but complied, spending her days sewing tiny clothes, preparing the cabin for a baby, and generally driving herself crazy with waiting. She'd never been good at being still, and pregnancy was teaching her patience she'd never known she needed. The baby arrived on a crisp October morning, almost exactly 9 months after their wedding night. Clara's labor started just before dawn, and by the time they got word to Doc Morrison, she was already well along. The doctor arrived to find Colt pacing frantically outside while Clara labored inside, attended by Mrs. Henderson and 2 other ranch wives who'd come to help. "How is she?" Colt demanded. "Is she all right? Is the baby—" "She's doing fine," Morrison said, gripping Colt's shoulder. "First babies take time, that's all. Could be hours yet. You need to be patient." Colt couldn't be patient. He wore a path in the dirt outside the cabin, alternating between praying and cursing and apologizing to Bill Hendricks's marker for putting Clara through this. When Clara's screams intensified, he tried to go inside, but Mrs. Henderson physically blocked the door. "This is women's work," she said firmly. "You stay out here and let us handle it." "But she needs me. What she needs is for you to not faint and give us another patient to deal with," Mrs. Henderson said. "Now sit down and wait like every other father in history." So Colt sat and waited and died 1,000 deaths listening to the woman he loved in pain. He'd faced down guns and knives and murderers, but nothing had ever terrified him like this. Then, just as the sun reached its zenith, a new sound cut through the air. A baby's cry, lusty and strong, announcing its arrival to the world. Colt was on his feet instantly, but Mrs. Henderson appeared in the doorway before he could rush inside. "Congratulations," she said with a tired smile. "You have a daughter, and your wife is asking for you." Colt stumbled inside on shaking legs. Clara lay in their bed, pale and exhausted but smiling, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in the quilt Clara had sewn during her pregnancy. She looked up as he approached, and the love in her eyes nearly brought him to his knees. "Meet your daughter," Clara said softly, pulling back the quilt to reveal a tiny red face with a shock of dark hair. "She's perfect." Colt sat carefully on the edge of the bed, hardly daring to breathe as Clara placed the baby in his arms. She was impossibly small, impossibly fragile, and impossibly beautiful. His daughter. His and Clara's. A life they'd created together, proof that something good could come from darkness, that love was stronger than violence. "What should we name her?" Clara asked. Colt thought for a moment, then said, "Hope, because that's what she represents. Hope for the future. Hope that we've built something that will last. Hope that the world can be better than it's been." "Hope Mercer," Clara tested. "Hope Weston Mercer, after my father." "Perfect," Colt said, tears streaming freely down his face. "She's perfect, and you're perfect, and I love you both more than life itself." He carefully handed the baby back to Clara and gathered them both into his arms, holding his family close, feeling more blessed than he'd ever imagined possible. Outside, the October sun shone bright and warm. Inside, a new life had begun, full of promise and possibility. The ranch prospered over the following years. They added cattle each spring, built new outbuildings, expanded the cabin to accommodate their growing family. Hope was joined by a son 2 years later, William, named for Bill Hendricks, and then another daughter, Emma, 2 years after that. The cabin rang with children's laughter, with joy and chaos and the beautiful mess of family life. Clara sometimes thought about her old cabin, wondered what it would have been like if Colt had never stumbled bleeding onto her porch. Would she still be there, alone and surviving, but not truly living? Or would some other disaster have eventually driven her away? She'd never know, and she found she didn't want to. That life felt like it had belonged to someone else, someone she'd been before she learned what she was truly capable of. Colt rarely spoke of Texas or Bill or the violence that had brought them together. But sometimes Clara would catch him staring at Bill's marker on the hill, and she knew he was remembering. Honoring the friend whose death had given Colt life. Promising to make it count, to make it mean something. They hosted barn dances and community gatherings, becoming central figures in the growing settlement around Fort Creek. Sheriff Brennan retired and moved into a small house in town, but he visited often, spoiling the children with candy and stories. Doc Morrison delivered all 3 of Clara's babies, and half the babies in the territory, it seemed, becoming something like family to them all. And through it all, through the hard winters and drought summers, through sickness and health, and the endless work of ranch life, Clara and Colt stood together. They fought sometimes, passionate arguments that cleared the air and made their reconciliations sweeter. They laughed often, finding joy in small moments and grand achievements alike. They loved fiercely, their connection deepening with each passing year, each shared trial, each triumph celebrated together. One evening, 10 years after they'd first met, they sat on the porch they'd finally built, watching their children play in the yard. Hope was teaching William to rope a fence post while Emma toddled after them, demanding to be included. The scene was ordinary and extraordinary all at once, a moment of domestic peace that had cost them everything to achieve. "Do you ever regret it?" Clara asked softly. "Getting shot, I mean. Everything that came after?" Colt took her hand, his thumb tracing the scar on her palm from some long-ago accident. "Not for a second," he said. "Getting shot led me to you. Led to this. I'd go through it all again if this was the outcome." "Even the trial? Even Blackwell?" "Even that," Colt confirmed, "because it taught us what we're made of, showed us we're strong enough to survive anything if we face it together. And it brought us here, to this porch, with those children, with this life. How could I regret that?" Clara leaned against him, watching the sun paint the sky in shades of gold and pink. "I used to think I was happy alone," she said, "but I didn't know what happiness was. Not really. This, you, the children, the ranch, this is happiness. This is everything." "Everything," Colt agreed. He kissed the top of her head, a gesture so familiar it was almost unconscious. "Best mistake I ever made, getting shot and ending up at your door." Clara laughed, the sound carrying across the yard, making their children look up and wave. "Best decision I ever made, not letting you die." "Think we're even now?" "Never," Clara said. We'll spend the rest of our lives saving each other in small ways. That's what love is, isn't it? Choosing each other day after day, year after year, until we can't imagine life any other way? Sounds about right to me, Colt said. As darkness fell and stars began to emerge, they called the children inside for supper. Hope came running, William close behind, both of them chattering about their day. Emma rode on Colt's shoulders, her small hands tangled in his hair, and Clara followed them all inside into the warm light of the cabin, into the life they'd built from blood and fire and desperate courage. She paused at the door and looked back once more at the land stretching away toward the mountains. Somewhere out there were the ruins of her old cabin, reclaimed by nature, forgotten by everyone except her. Somewhere out there was the memory of the woman she'd been before, solitary, surviving, strong, but alone. That woman was gone now, replaced by someone better. Someone who'd learned that true strength wasn't about not needing anyone. It was about trusting someone enough to need them, to let them see your vulnerabilities, to build something together that neither could build alone. Clara Mercer, wife and mother and rancher, stepped into her home and closed the door against the gathering dark. Inside was everything that mattered. Inside was family, was love, was the future they'd fought so hard to claim. And it was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything.